Hello again, friends, and you are our friends, and welcome back to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive Thru right here, wherever it is that you are on this beautiful, well, it's not beautiful today, but I'm sure tomorrow when the show is released, it will be beautiful, or it had just been beautiful. Depending on the time of the day, the show is finished. I'm your host, the great Brian Last. You may hear some sounds behind me. I don't know exactly how to describe them, but they are disseminating from this man, the leader of the cult of Cornette, the post office ninja, Mr. Jim Cornette.
It's not a beautiful day after you just contradicted yourself, just first words out of your mouth, and then you said, but wait, it's not. But why isn't it a bit? I'm looking out the window. It's a beautiful day. What's the matter with your day?
It's overcast.
Why are you so goddamn gloomy? It might be a cloud hanging over your head. Did you ever come to think about that? That it may be you. It may not be the rest of us. In our world, it may be you. And the world that you have brought upon yourself is why that you are covered up with gloom and misery. Doom, despair, and agony. Oh me, deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony. Oh me, that's what you sound like, Brian. Right out of the gate, trying to tell these people it's not a beautiful day. God damn it, I'll tell you what. You're not going to tell my cult of Cornette it's not a fucking beautiful day. I'll come on you with the wrath of God.
Once again, you're Mr. Glasses half empty. What I'm saying is...
Harley just snorted at that, too, I'll have you know.
What I'm saying is, I'm hoping for tomorrow to be even better than today, which is exactly what I just said.
Tomorrow.
And it's overcast here right now. Yes, there's a cloud over my head. It appears to be one giant cloud covering everything.
I love you. Tomorrow, you're only a day away. Nobody's ever sung that song like good old Andrea McArdle. I wonder what happened to her.
She didn't get the role in the movie.
Well, that was kind of shitty. They were shitty to poor Andrea. Anyway, Brian, have you ever watched a bird make a nest?
No.
What? Seriously, you have not? It's fascinating. It is the wonders of nature. I got up early yesterday. Yesterday was Sunday, for those of you people who don't know when we're recording. And it's 6:45 in the morning on a Sunday, and it's cool, and it's not. Go out on the deck outside the office here. I'm surveying some of the work that the Monroe brothers have done, and I look over, and on my deck here in the office, because it's top floor. So if I'm standing on this deck, and I'm a 6-foot-tall adult male, which overqualifies me for the AEW roster. So if I'm 6 feet tall, I'm standing on this deck, my head is about 4 feet off the ground, whatever the case. And there's a tree only about 15 feet away from the deck railing, so I can look right at my eye level in the crook of this tree. And there is this cute little birdie, not Birdie Sanders now. It's another. We've got plenty of birds out here this year. The birds are really flocking, as they say. But this bird is building a nest right in the crook of the tree where I can just look right over and see it. And you don't often get that bird's eye view, so to speak. See what I did there? Wait a minute. Hold on. Where's my goddamn gimmick here? Hold on. I made a good funny. Hold on. See, anyway, I got a bird's eye view of a bird making a bird's nest from scratch. He just got, I guess, what you would call his foundation in. It's just a little bit, but also there is a foot long, about an inch wide strip of white cloth, a rag or something that the Monroe brothers have been using outside. And it's a strip, and it's hanging from this nest. And I'm watching the bird fly off and go grab a twig or a piece of grass or what, the things that they use to build the nest, and come fly in and put it in and then fly back. I stood there watching that bird go back and forth about 20 minutes. And it was just fascinating. It just put me in a good mood. And then I quit on this one. He flies back in and he's got his base done. And he takes his little beak and he starts grabbing that strip of cloth and pulling it up about an inch at a time and tucking it in. That's his caulking. And he pulls an inch at a time. He pulls it up and tucks it in till it's all the way around that fucking nest. And from hanging a foot down, it's all up in that thing. And so now today I went out there and he's added the first floor, and I believe he's going for possibly a split level condominium type of thing because he's really worked on it. But that you can see that strip of cloth all fed in with all of the other bird nest and everything. And I think we may be going to have some more babies around here because it's an awful big nest just for one bird. I'm thinking he's got a family going on, or she, as the case may be. I'm a simple small town bird lawyer. I don't know everything about the way that these birds operate. But you should do that sometime, Brian. It'll put you in a good mood. Sit and watch a bird build its nest. It's fascinating. Nature in action.
Well, I guess there's more of that happening out in the open at Cornette Creek than there is here.
This ain't at the creek. This ain't at the creek. This is right up here at the house.
All right. Well, we're not here.
What we did I tell you what we found at the creek over the weekend?
No.
We now have a duck.
Get the duck out of here.
We have a duck. It's a goddamn, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I've been told that it's a duck. And this was walking and quacking. And it looks like your classic picture of a fucking duck. One of the wild ducks, not like one of those white ducks that they fucking decorate goddamn gardens with and, in fancy places, but just your regular old run-of-the-mill wild duck. So we have chipmunks, we have squirrels, we have deer, we have ducks, we have birds, and potentially we got plenty of moles. Still can't get rid of the moles. And I believe there is still a very large raccoon or possum or something, because I've seen its outline at the fence row at dusk. There's something back there. We haven't found it yet. Wildlife, Brian.
Wildlife? In and out of the ring?
While Brian stays in the truck, we'll send Jim Fowler out you're no Marlon Perkins. See, Marlon Perkins would have been all over that. Did you ever watch Wild Kingdom when you were a kid, Brian?
I was not a big fan of Wild Kingdom, no.
Did you ever see a grown man naked?
Yeah, I know exactly where you're going.
Yeah. Anyway, but it's not, the bird's nest has cheered me up, and the baby deer and everything. And what's also cheering me up is I'll have you know that the international orders, another bunch went out this morning. I'm going back. Bree is working on her day off tomorrow. I'm going back in the morning with another bunch. All the international orders, which are the end of the line, will be out by the end of this week. So in conjunction with the beautiful Memorial Day weekend, everything that was ordered during Action Figure Armageddon will now be officially in the mail to everybody. And if you ain't got your shit yet, email me and I'll see what I can do. We'll track it from one side or the other. But anyway, and that's why I announced the big news, Brian. Have you told the people? This is your show, by the way. So have you told the people the big news that I related this past week on The Experience?
No, I have not.
No, because you've been too busy worried about the goddamn weather, telling people it's not a nice day. Because all of the orders to Cornette's Collectibles are about to be filled, we're getting back in the cameo business just in time for Father's Day. We got a bunch of requests. Sunday, June 6th and Sunday, June 13th. We will be putting 50 each day, 50 cameos on sale for Father's Day or any other special occasion, or just anybody that needs a good stern talking to and a redress. Tell them what's the matter with themselves. 50 cameos each day at noon Eastern time on Sunday, June 6th and Sunday, June 13th at cameo.com/Jim Cornette. Hotchkiss is going to have his finger on the button, so you know these sell out quick. So please be ready. You got two chances, Sunday the 6th and Sunday the 13th, noon Eastern time. 50 cameos each for Father's Day or any other opulent occasion or wonderful celebration that you may need to mark and memorialize in the month of June. And Hotchkiss is also working on the new JimCornette.com but we're not rushing him. He's a perfectionist, and so am I. And also, I need a break. So we are targeting sometime in July for that to go back up. And that's when the merchandise will be back on sale, including some more of the action figures at Cornette's Collectibles. Now I've got everybody up to date on what's going on with me. Brian, what about you?
What about me?
When's last collectibles going back up?
We have merchandise. We have fine merchandise that's actually available right now. Our store is open.
There you go.
tinyurl.com/superpod store with some more merchandise news coming in the weeks ahead. But on the topic of news and things coming.
That's what we do. We don't have enough tiny URLs anymore.
That's right. We can create more for everything.
I have an update on something that you didn't know the other day. I asked you, Hawaiian Brian, I can't remember now in what context it was, but I asked you a question that you could not answer about the Hawaiian culture. I said, what is the Hawaiian word for piss? And you could not come up with this. Did you study this since then? Have you studied your Hawaiian, or do you know the answer to this question yet?
I did not return to this.
You didn't return. You didn't circle back to this.
No, I did not.
All right. Well, I'll fill you in right now. Steve from Pennsylvania writes.
Yeah, it sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
Well, all right now. Hey, here.
Steve from Pennsylvania. Tell me about Hawaiian culture, Steve.
Well,
They don't call you Hawaiian Steve, do they?
You may want to ball those words up and shove them either down your throat or up your sphincter there, fucking Hawaiian Brian, when you hear the first sentence that comes out of his mouth here.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Jim. As the son of a native Hawaiian mother.
Prove it.
He sent a copy of his driver's license. It states clearly that he was born in Kenya but moved to Hawaii at an early age.
His driver's license, really? Wow.
As the son of a native Hawaiian mother, I wanted to give you the scoop in reference to your question to Brian. Hawaiian slang for piss is shishi. It comes either from the male's ala ala or from the female's beady beady. I am pleased to serve, Steve from Pennsylvania. So, next time that you need to take a shishi, then you better grab your ala ala, because some other woman might be next to you grabbing her beady beady. I'm glad we got that all straightened out.
There's no confirmation any of that is true, but okay, I'm glad we got it figured out.
I believe the man. He sent documentation.
He said nothing. What documentation?
He said his mother's Hawaiian. That's good. Who are you to doubt Steve's mother's word?
It could be one of these guys on Reddit trying to mess with you. Like, I'm going to get Cornette to say these words. They're not really Hawaiian words. They're code words. For whatever.
Beady beady, ala ala, she. Hey, we got an update also. We've got to make a correction here. When we spoke this past weekend about the WWE Treasures episode where they were searching for the Iron Sheik's boot that he wore in the boot camp match with Sergeant Slaughter, I said Pantazzi sold him a gimmick boot. Turned out it wasn't the boot camp match boot. We have some behind-the-scenes information. Direct from the horse's mouth himself, John Pantazzi. Mr. Wrestling himself. Here's the thing. Obviously, John has a well-known wrestling collection, right? And Ben Brown, the archivist, had been to his house before, and he knew he had, various things, and they had contacted him about an Iron Sheik boot, right? So, yeah, I got an Iron Sheik boot. So then they set up for them to come over, and they called him the day before and said, "Oh, Sergeant Slaughter's coming with us." Oh shit, okay. But he still didn't make the connection until they asked him, or they basically asked the question. So this is the boot that the Sheik wore in the boot camp match with Sarge, and Sarge is standing right there, and John's like humming, and that's why he gave. If you go back and watch, he gave the answer. He said, "I can't say yes and I can't say no," right? He was very ambivalent about it. But he did say the negotiation was a shoot. He didn't want to take any less than he got, and he got that.
Everyone's giving WWE a discount on these shows.
But,
which is bullshit.
I think he could have got more. But
should have gotten more, yeah.
But yeah, so the point is, he fucking blew snot when he heard me say, Pantazzi sold him a gimmick boot. He tried to be as honest as he could, but he also included a little bit of trivia. The answer to that question, I can't say yes and I can't say no. Do you know where he got that from originally?
Can't say yes and I can't say no. Bob Dylan.
No. Grandpa Munster Al Lewis. Because
my kind of guy.
as a young actor, Al Lewis lived in the same apartment building as Marlon Brando and Wally Cox. And he was being interviewed one time, Al Lewis was, and the interviewer asked him if it was true that somebody caught Marlon Brando and Wally Cox doing something they should have been doing out in the hallway of the apartment building with each other. And his answer was, I can't say yes and I can't say no. So there you go. But this is about a gimmick boot. Nobody ever caught Pantazzi out in a parking lot or out in the hallway of an apartment complex. I'll tell you that. He always did all that stuff behind closed doors.
It wouldn't be with Wally Cox. It would be with Steve Cox. For the wrestling.
Steve Do It Cox.
What a nickname. Steve Do It Cox. Hey, if Watts doesn't go out of business.
Have their minds in a gutter back then.
If Watts doesn't go out of business or, sell the business, is that the next big guy he tries to build up in the mold of Dr. Death?
Nah.
You don't think so?
I met Steve Cox and I met Cox and I liked Cox. But Cox was no Doc. I think that, I think Bill probably saw that. He was going to get whatever he could get, but it wasn't, lightning wasn't striking twice there. Especially before he started to do it to it.
Marlon Brando, this fucking actor that women fell in love with. Then look at him and could say, like, wow, when he was young, handsome guy. Charismatic. Person he chooses to fool around with in the hallways, Wally Cox? Really?
Well, that's because he was next door. There's something to be said for convenience. But I don't know why they couldn't have gone to one person's place or the other instead of having to just do the meet in the middle there in the hallway.
You could just see Grandpa Munster walking by.
They needed to get something straight between them, and it needed to happen right then and there.
All right. Well, this was my show.
I've got another update. Just the viewers. The viewers like to report in how they're doing if they have a story that relates to one of our programs.
Well, anything for the viewers.
Well, this is for Lee in North Carolina. Hey, Jim, so a few weeks ago, I was finishing up catering a wedding in one small hick town and driving home to my equally small hick town. It's 2 a.m. I'm tired. My wife is sleeping. I'm not going to mess around in the kitchen, so I decided to go through the McDonald's drive-thru. At night, the system at this McDonald's is always down and it's cash only. Small town, North Carolina, 2 a.m. I wonder how much of that's getting reported. And they only start making your food once you get up to the window to pay, so it's a commitment. Been to some of those places. So I pulled up and had the latest experience playing. I put my car in park and prepared to wait. That's when I noticed the vehicle in front of me. Caked like shit on the back of this jalopy were NRA stickers, Trump stickers, and one of those dumb thin blue line flags. You had just started into an extended political rant that I was quite enjoying, and as I'm listening to you and staring at the back of this ugly car waiting on my double cheeseburgers, I saw an opportunity for some education. I went back to the beginning of your rant, rolled my windows down, and turned the volume up so the car in front could hear it. We still were not anywhere close to the window when you finished, so I went ahead and went back to the beginning of the rant again. I enjoyed it just as much as the first time around and started to replay it a third time, but suddenly a young woman with purple hair poked her head out of the driver's side window of this jalopy and said with the thickest southern drawl, "It's my daddy's truck." I fucking lost it. That alone made up for my wait, and I wanted to say thank you and Brian for everything you do. It's my daddy's truck.
You're welcome for all that we do.
What all is it that you do?
I ask the questions that are sent in to you, the leader of the cult of Cornette.
Well, what should we do here?
Well, we have questions, but also one of the things that's time sensitive, I guess we could say. Last night, as we are recording on A&E, Another in the series of WWE Biography episodes, this being the biography of the Ultimate Warrior.
Oh, well, I see why that A&E made the move to jump in front of the dark side of the ring and change the A&E changed their original schedule so that when they heard what Dark Sides was, so they could get their Warrior show out first. And I see why they're wanting to try to whitewash a little history here with Mr. Warrior, with portraying him in a positive, motivational light the week before Dark Side of the Ring tells everybody what they already know about what he was. I would assume, because they're going to tell the truth. I'll be on that one, by the way. But let's talk about the biography version. You know, and maybe I'm biased. You came along a generation later, so maybe I'm more biased. But I lived the 80s as both a dedicated, diehard wrestling fan, which is how I started out the 80s, and still after I got into business, I was still the biggest fan of wrestling in the world. So I started as a fan and then became a professional, and the Ultimate Warrior offended me on both counts. As a fan, you remember, or if you don't remember, you remember reading the stuff that was written a few years beforehand. At the time where Warrior was first getting the push, he was the anathema, the poison pill to every smart fan in wrestling, the small number there were at the time, because everything he did related to the wrestling business was the shits, except for sell tickets. And it was infuriating to the smart fans, the few sheets that existed, the Observer readers, basically, because it just, you saw the clips on this show to remind you, the work looked like shit, what there was of it. He couldn't go 10 minutes or the fucking people would start throwing shit. He had to get in and get out. And what he did looked horrible. The promos were incomprehensible. The whole gimmick was, as the show also illustrated, aimed at kids, because all of the talking heads, almost none of them actually knew him, worked with him, or were even adults when he was on top. They were all said, yeah, when I was 9 years old, the Ultimate Warrior was the greatest. So the fans, and I won't even say all smart fans, people also forget that at that point in time specifically, the WWF and WCW had two different fan bases. Of course, there were always crossovers, with some people just watched anything with ropes and turnbuckles. But there were very distinct fan bases that came from WCW being a more southern product and the WWF coming from the Northeast. So at one time, they had completely distinct fan bases. And then cable changed that somewhat. But for all the reasons that we've mentioned, that Vince McMahon, the WWF, the national expansion, they didn't draw in certain parts of the country, like the Carolinas, Tennessee, Texas, places with really strong local promotions, not just because the local promotion was so strong, but because a lot of those people, and I would hear from them when I was walking into the building unsolicited in the back, I would hear from a lot of these fans. They thought the NWA was the adult product, was more serious, was real, however they phrased it. The WWF was cartoon, it was phony, it was too show busy, however they phrased it. So those fans, that Hogan worked because Hogan could also work, and Hogan could talk and connect with people. The other bodybuilders in wrestling, and we can talk about them here in this discussion here in a few minutes, had varying degrees of success depending on whether they ever tried to and accomplished learning to work or not. But Warrior, would you say, Brian, was really the first total Vince McMahon creation out of whole cloth. This guy looks great and is in no other way suited to be in this business, but we're going to push him and we're going to smash him over. And because of the look and the style that I am creating, it's going to work. He was the first everybody else had come from a territory where they'd spent some time. They had some experience. This guy, he just, I know Warrior had worked 6 weeks in Memphis and been in Dallas for 4 months or whatever the fuck. But he pretty much just smashed this guy over with no help from the guy because the guy didn't know what he was doing. Would that be the first notable case of Vince doing that?
I don't know. And I think that's a little harsh towards what the Ultimate Warrior, Jim Hellwig, did bring to the table.
What did he bring to the table?
I mean, to play that role and for it to work in that role, and like you said, you and I have different perspectives on this based on our age and when we started watching wrestling. You may not realize, but I don't know how many people could have pulled that off and done what he did in his bizarre way.
Well, no, I'm not saying that somebody else could have done it, but the look, nobody else looked like that. Especially
Vince tried it. Vince wanted Tom McGee to be that guy. And it's interesting to think about the fact that he went with Warrior.
But we'll go back and look at the tapes, though. The one thing that Warrior had that McGee didn't have was Warrior looked like he was going to have a stroke every time you saw him. He ran to the ring, he shook the ropes, he did all his shit, he ran in place. That's why he was always blown up. He had no cardio anyway, but he couldn't go fucking 8 minutes because he's having a goddamn aneurysm the whole time. McGee was almost fucking, laid back. So I'm saying Warrior's body, look, and intensity, the way he delivered the promos, even if they were complete nonsense, you couldn't understand it. It was the over-the-top cartoon 80s era of the WWF. He looked like a superhero. He acted that way that not even no grown man ever acted like, but also no fucking crazy wrestler had ever acted like. Because only in his mind did any of that shit make sense. And I've said it before, it's like when Jimmy Valiant was handsome Jimmy Valiant as a babyface, his fucking promos, if you wrote them down and read them back, didn't make a lick of sense. But because he said them that way, they got over because it sounded like something he would say. I'm just saying the whole thing with Warrior was the look, the body, the physique, and him looking like he's going to have a stroke all the time. And Vince smashed it over, had every top guy in the company not only put him over, but put him over quicker than they'd put over anybody else, including and up to Andre. And it didn't last long because it wore thin. Because go back and look at the history of bodybuilders in wrestling. They've been around since the days of the bodybuilders, but the ones that learned to work, and I mean, Don Fargo was competition bodybuilder before he got into wrestling. And at various points in time in his life, you could see it because he'd train down and do whatever, but then other times he looked like shit, but he learned to work. And then you got guys like Magnificent Zulu that we've talked about, had to go from place to place because he looked like $1 million, but he was a shits. Once you saw him 3 times, like, fuck.
But they gave the Ultimate Warrior nothing. But that's the other thing. It's not like they gave him the title. And again, different perspective. I was 10 when he got the title. They gave him the title, and then whatever excitement an Ultimate Warrior fan had over that title win was gone pretty quickly because he had no heels. He had no one to work with. They brought back Rick Rude. He had just beaten Rick Rude the year before. Even though he had a haircut, it was still Rick Rude. There was no one for the Ultimate Warrior to wrestle. The WWF at the time, just like they did with Diesel and other people, as soon as he got the title, all of a sudden it's a different Ultimate Warrior than the one that won over the fans. But he had no one. Look at 1990 WWF is a rough year. There isn't a lot in terms of singles heels. There's Earthquake, who's working with Hogan most of the year. There's not a lot there for Warrior. He doesn't get a lot until 91 when The Undertaker shows up.
Hey, on the flip side of that, would you want to work with the Ultimate Warrior? Hey, no, boy, I'd love to.
No, I wouldn't.
And anyway, that's what I was going to say is the dedicated fans, traditional wrestling fans, they were like, what the fuck? And guys in the business, that's where really the concept of who Vince, what look you had to have for Vince McMahon to hire you and push you in the WWF was cemented. And a lot of guys that were never going to look like that, but were fucking talented, resented that, obviously. But also, that's when everybody either started trying to look like that, or guys got into business basically because they already looked like that. And that's where we had to go through that several years of just insanity with everybody that had ever lifted a weight. But but that's the thing. I guess I liken it to in the music business, when they pushed Milli Vanilli and there's all these bands going, what the fuck? Or, just because some schmo is a big name actor, they get a plum part that a real artist could sink their teeth into or whatever. But it's just from the start of him being in the business, nobody ever said he wanted to get any better. He wanted to learn. He wanted to understand the way that the psychology of wrestling or the way you thought about it. Everybody talks about how he wanted to get himself over and create whatever the fuck it was he was creating, but nobody ever says he knew he was the shits. They say the opposite. He thought he knew everything. Even on this show, I think it was Lawler that said it. The matches were the shits, but you couldn't tell them. And I remember...
And that was 1986.
Yeah.
Early on, yeah.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, even late 85.
That's right,
yeah.
85.
And I've heard that in several places. He didn't want to put... When they first got to Memphis and they did the thing with Phil Hickerson, who was a babyface, Warrior Hellwig, actually said, why should he beat me? Well, that's ridiculous. Who's going to believe that? And they had to tell him because, number one, it's the business. And number two, that fat fuck, if he wanted to, could really beat the fuck out of you easily. And he didn't like hearing that. And the same thing they alluded to in this show when they went to Mid-South, and Sting kind of said it nicely. He already thought that he should be getting paid top dollar, didn't like the fucking wrestling lifestyle. I'm sure the road trips in Louisiana, after he'd been this, fucking bodybuilding fanatic in Atlanta, and all of a sudden he's wrestling in Louisiana, that fucking was probably stressful also. But instead of doing what everybody else did and sucking it up because you're the shits and you just started and you need to learn, he tried to hold Watts up for more money and wasn't going to fucking go to the shows and blah, blah, blah. And that's when Watts told him, you know what, you need to find another line of work, and kept Sting. And Sting did it the right way. And then this fucking guy gets pushed by, let's face it, the world's biggest wrestling promoter who's had a lifelong bodybuilding fetish. And they both end up, Sting and Warrior, on top of the two big companies. But Sting actually learned and paid attention and tried and admitted he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. And the other guy just had somebody hand it to him. So there was a lot of heat from the fans and from the wrestlers on this guy. And I've told you what Bobby Heenan thought of him, and et cetera, et cetera. So as the first time I saw this on television, I was already in the business, but I said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. It's the ultimate difference, no pun intended, between the traditional NWA style of pro wrestling and this WWF ice cream bar cartoon bullshit. And that's why Sable is the female Ultimate Warrior to me. They have had a track record of being able to take people with absolutely no discernible talent whatsoever for the job at hand, except they look great standing there, and Vince can work that mass hypnosis and get these schlubs over. And it just always used to drive me out of my mind. But anyway, they went to great lengths to babyface him from the start on this. They had his mother, his football coach, his daughters. I didn't know he was from Crawfordsville, Indiana.
That was surprising later on in the episode where he talked about Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher, the idea of him watching them when he was a kid.
Well, and see, that's the thing. you didn't actually have to watch Bruiser and Crusher if he was born in 1960-ish. So if you were a 10, 12-year-old kid in Indiana, you didn't have to ever see a wrestling program on TV ever to know and hear Dick the Bruiser and the Crusher. I refuse to believe he ever watched them on fucking television. I refuse to believe he'd ever seen a wrestling match before fucking Bassman got a hold of him. He didn't get mentioned either, did he? They had the guy that was running the gym instead of Bassman. I wonder where that fucking slime ball ended up. But anyway, they baby-faced him, his daughters, his mother, his football coach, his small-town beginnings. He looked normal in high school. He was, 150 pounds lighter than he was 3 or 4 years later. There's a red flag. Who is author David Shoemaker?
That's the fucking guy from the Andre the Giant documentary that was just making stuff up, but saying it like he was an authority, like he did here, and he knows what he's talking about. He was the guy who said Andre toured the territories as a heel attraction for the baby faces to beat.
Don't we know every person of any note that has written any type of book about wrestling?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so if this guy haven't written a book about wrestling, then what does it make a difference if he's an author of fucking classical Middle English poetry? Why is he on a goddamn biography of the Ultimate Warrior?
Well, apparently he did write a book years ago about wrestling.
What?
I don't know. He had some kind of character. I think he's like the Masked Man. And he was on like a podcast on, I think it was Bill Simmons, because Bill Simmons uses this goof in his various things, like he has credibility. But he's like one of these guys that liked wrestling enough to want to talk about it and do a podcast, but didn't like it enough to learn anything about it. What a goof.
Well, that's the thing. I'll jump ahead. I made this note later, but the talking heads are all podcasters. And this is their descriptions: podcasters, authors, a comedian. And they're all fucking 40 years old, and every single one of them was a kid when the Ultimate Warrior, and shit stain somehow ended up on this. You realize that not only was he not in the office, he wasn't even working for the company until the Ultimate Warrior came back in fucking 1996. And he's talking about his 80s run.
I was actually sitting there and thinking about the timeline and trying to think if he would ever have been around the Warrior other than 96. And he wasn't even on the writing team yet in 96, was he?
No. Well, no, he was writing the magazine.
Right.
So he was there and he would have had interaction, but not until 1996, no. But he probably did comments from something else, and because did you notice nobody that actually worked with this fucking guy on a regular basis in the ring was even quoted? So Vince said some things. Was Bruce even in here? I'm not sure.
Once,
I don't know.
Once about the 92 drug test failure.
Okay. It was people who were fans of his as a wrestler and nobody who actually had to suffer his presence as a human being.
Hey, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a great example, and I love him in this, and he's much like you guys during your active careers. He's kind of becoming the northern version of you in these documentaries. Heyman, Paul Heyman was great here. I can't think of when Paul Heyman would have ever had any interaction with the Ultimate Warrior.
No, but that's the thing is Paul is so brilliant and he's got such a vocabulary and he knows the ways to word things where he didn't bury himself, but he didn't actually say a ton of glowing things about the guy, but he worded things in such a way that it moved the story along without really being committal in a large part. And he could focus on whatever was good and magnify that rather than go through. But yes, but Paul is doing a good job because obviously he'll sit down and prepare some things to say about whoever the fucking person is that they're addressing. But no, I can't imagine he would have had any interaction with Warrior except did Warrior ever go to Studio 54 when Paulie had any of those press parties or?
No.
Well, there you go. So Warrior gets a bodybuilding fetish in high school. And am I the only one when they started showing all the covers of Muscular Development magazine in the 70s and all those bodybuilders and seeing what he went from to what he wanted to look like, because as not only when you put on 100 pounds or more, not only is it an obsession and there's means in which to do it that aren't healthy, but it just, come on. When you go that far, there's something wrong with your adjustment of who you think you are. And I'm wondering, since he turned out to be so anti-gay later on, am I the only amateur psychologist, psychiatrist that have connected this bodybuilding fetish and with his fear, not fear of, he said, I'm not afraid of the Q words, but his obvious phobia toward him having to prove how distasteful that is to him. Methinks he doth protest too much. Is there some fucking Freudian thing going on there? What do you think?
I'm not going to play Sigmund Freud here and try to guess. I will say he was certainly very into his own unique style of masculinity. Like, it's like kind of, I once read something somewhere where they said Tom Cruise walks into a room and he finds the guy who's like the most charismatic and he just starts behaving like him because he wants that reaction. And with the Warrior, I think he just kind of had in his head, because he didn't have that male figure based on what you're hearing in his biography, like he kind of in his head had a certain way he thought men behave, masculine ways, and that became part of his thing. I don't know. I'm not going to accuse.
I think
Harry White was into bodybuilding. I can't.
Well, I'm not saying no. Now, see, now you're conflating things. Harry, you can be into something without being fixated on it and fucking changing your whole life around about it, even if it's an unhealthy exercise enterprise. He moved to California to be a bodybuilder, a professional bodybuilder.
Hey, let me put it to you this way, because here's the way I can relate to it. If someone who thought very little of professional wrestling saw your magazine collection when you were 17 years old, 18 years old, any of our collections, they'd be saying the same thing. My father walked into the room once when I was dubbing a Memphis video in the middle of the Fabulous Ones in a barn, chewing on hay to the Gap Band. My dad thought I was gay for years because of that. Because you can't explain it. I'm making a copy.
Let me just tell you one thing. Those pictures sold to a predominantly female audience like pussy on a troop train. We couldn't keep those things on the fucking tables of them in the hot tubs and the barn and the fucking straw in their mouth with their blue jeans opened up and everything. Well, anyway.
My point, though, was a lot of people would probably look at people like us, professional wrestling fans, and see some of these magazine covers of wrestling magazines and think the same thing. So I don't think it's fair.
All right, but he's definitely on steroids by 18 minutes into this thing, and he's gained 150 pounds. And then they show the Memphis debut with Lance, and I love seeing this kind of stuff and Lance Russell on television now in this day and age.
Hey, forget that. Did you think you'd see Buddy Wayne on national TV?
Well, that's what I was about to say. And Buddy Wayne, his work looked better than Warriors and Stings. They showed enough of that footage to show as baby faces they sucked, so they switched heel, and then as heels they sucked. And I've told that story before when I came home Christmas of '85 and watched them go 30 minutes with Lawler and Dundee in Louisville, and it was fucking brutal. And every one of the boys is watching, laughing. They weren't laughing 2 years later when those two schlubs are making $1 million a year. But anyway, they did intersperse some of the Memphis and Mid-South footage here, but it's, it is what it is on these shows. I had never heard a story, much less the story, so I don't know if this was correct. Did they name him Dingo Warrior because of one of the boys' dogs?
I had never heard that version of it before.
But where did the Dingo Warrior gimmick come from?
I thought it had come from Gary Hart.
But Gary Hart
reads lots of magazines, and he said, the dingo was a dog. I could just see him thinking of it.
But Gary hadn't been doing that much LSD since he left Australia. So why would they announce the Dingo Warrior from Queens, New York? All of this was true.
From Queens, New York. That's the funniest part of the whole
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, or were they ribbon Hellwig? But why would Gary Hart be, involved in because he was his manager, because they thought and that's the thing, he was a heel, but the people started cheering him just because he didn't know how to work and he did impressive shit. And he's even got Gary Hart as his manager, and the people are still going, Dingo, Dingo.
First of all, they interspersed the clips of him as a heel and him as a babyface. They really didn't do any justice in terms of a chronological history of the Warrior. Like, the clips were jumping back and forth all throughout the documentary, but especially in Dallas. Mustache, no mustache, heel, babyface. You could certainly see Gary Hart's eyes. This guy shows up. He's just thinking, if I could just latch onto this guy, where can we go? But that didn't work out.
Was that one of the times? Why did they get him? Was that like the Billy Jack thing a couple years beforehand? One of the boys was either hurt. Was that after Kerry's wreck?
It was after Kerry's wreck, because, or at least right around the same time, because it would have been the summer of '86 that he got there. Yeah.
See, yeah, that's generally they would try. Remember, that's how Billy Jack came in '84, because Kerry was up for and almost got a part in a movie, but then he didn't get it. He came Rocky IV. So he came back, and then Billy Jack left. And then every time that one of the boys would go down, they'd try to find some impressive babyface physical specimen that they could do something with. I don't fucking know. But anyway, Watts was telling Fritz, I'm sure, hey, if you want him, you can have him. But here's the problem I've had with him. But anyway, I like the note that he went to his 10-year high school reunion to show off and fuck with people that he didn't like.
That was pretty great. I have to say, that was pretty great.
And then we got to the WWF stint and his introduction and the highlights, and that's where I realized, because I did not watch the TV at that point, right? Or it really, we've mentioned it at any point. On some of the pay-per-views, I'd watch the big matches I thought they were going to be any good. But the WWF TV is really the only TV that I wasn't seeing late 80s, because I got the tapes from everywhere else. But going back and looking, every clip that they used is pretty much the impression that I had of every match I ever saw of Warriors. The shit looked like shit, and it's spastic. And the goofy facials, the huffing and puffing, the gesticulating and finger pointing, the stagey overacting. Can you see who the Warrior was patient zero? But can you see why the first time I saw young Twinkle Toes in Ring of Honor back in like 2006, when they said, "Oh, look at this guy from Canada," I said, he reminds me of the Ultimate Warrior, but maybe this one will learn. Anyway, he did the worst body slam on Andre ever. Of course, to be fair, that was later in Andre's career, but Andre was trying to post up for him, and he didn't fucking get under him at all. His wife calls him Warrior. I know he changed his fucking name legally so that he could trademark his own shit that never went anywhere because he was never anybody after the wrestling business. But his wife, now that he's dead and she's doing a documentary on TV, couldn't call him Jim. Does that just not sound so fucking goofy?
How do you feel as a Jim? Does it bother you that he ran from the name?
No, actually, I don't want to share my name with him. However, it just sounded goofy. My husband, Warrior. I would expect that they would. Anyway.
Do you call him War for short? War, breakfast.
Yeah. I was like, her real name was Virginia. They used to call her Virgin for short, but not for long. I am pretty sure that this is the first time that I ever saw any clip, highlight, or part of the match of Hogan versus Warrior. What they showed on this program.
From 1990? Really?
Yes. I don't ever remember. I wouldn't have gone out of my way to say, I've got to see that. I was on the road at the time. I was getting tapes from everywhere, the TV shows that still existed, the territories that still existed. But I wouldn't have watched that on purpose. And I don't know that I ever went back and had any cause to after that, so I'm pretty sure I never saw it. It lived up to all my expectations of what it would have been. And then Shane McMahon puts over how hard Warrior worked to get to the top. Jesus Christ. I don't know that he was ever in a car with any veteran and asked one story. Asked for one fucking story. I don't know if he was ever in a car with a veteran. I've heard he got his own locker room, and he had a driver, and he didn't dress with most of the boys, if any of them. Why does Shitstain talk in that annoying cadence where he puts periods in the middle of sentences and no punctuation after the end of them? ? Did you love the video of Warrior giving the apology to the I can't remember if I even knew the guy's name or his connection, but this kid that Warrior blew off, was rude to in an airport, really hopped on, was at one point I knew what kind of connection he had, but it was somebody important to the business at that point. And you know, he was basically fucking, Vince was telling him what to fucking do, but he was going to argue about it regardless, right?
How'd you like Vince saying, it's a work.
It's a work.
It's a work.
That was the first time that I've seen footage of Vince producing somebody on TV. Has there been more I've missed? It gave you an insight into how Vince kind of cajoles things out of you.
Not just that one, but all throughout this, I was maybe most intrigued by the outtake footage of the promos. I'd like to see what else they have.
They probably had a lot of outtakes, busted takes at least. If that fucking one or two that they showed was any indication. So anyway, at that point they start telling a story. Well, he was flipping out, and a lot of the talking heads were trying to present it from his side, like any of his behavior was justified at all ever. Re-injuring Bobby Heenan's bad neck and not apologizing and just going, oh well. Anyway, I can't wait. Did I mention for Thursday night for Dark Side of the Ring? I like the line Vince, we said, I couldn't wait to fire him. And that letter, I have a copy of that letter around here somewhere where he called him a legend in his own mind. They could have read more of Warrior's letters to Vince, and it would have illustrated more to the normal public how fucking fixated this guy was on that he thought that he should be the biggest deal in wrestling and should be treated a certain way and this and that and the other thing, and all the sacrifices that he'd made for Vince McMahon and the WWF, when I remind everybody that this was a guy that had been kicked out of 2 different territories, and the only person that wanted to give him a spot at all was the guy that had a fetish for pushing bodybuilders. And if it hadn't been for Vince McMahon, then what was Hellwig's backup plan to say he was going to be a chiropractor at one point? He would have been the most muscular chiropractor in Atlanta if it hadn't been for Vince McMahon. But he thought Vince was a father figure.
That was one of the funniest things. They had all these people throughout the whole thing saying that because his own father left him at 10, he saw Vince as a father figure. And then they even had his own mother say that she thought the Warrior saw Vince as both a mother figure and a father figure. And then they go to Vince and they say, did you see him as a son? And Vince says, no, I have a son.
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
And then when they started doing the drug tests on him when he came back for the last run in 92 there, they showed that he was taking Motrin. And then he was about 6 months later, whatever, he's taking all these antidepressant, anti-this, anti-that. Here's the thing. A lot of people mentally can't handle the pressure of being a big star. That means that if they're not equipped for that line of work, maybe they shouldn't ought to get in it. But to act like, I mean, I've known guys that had real pressure in the business and real pressure whether they were going to make it or not, and fucking pressure with their family and what's going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And this guy, he had to turn to all these antidepressant, anti-inflammatory, anti-whatever the fuck drugs to cope with the pressure of a promoter basically pushing him and paying him more than anybody else in the business, with the exception of Hulk Hogan. And that's a lot of pressure. Maybe it was pressure on him because deep down he knew he had no idea what he was fucking doing. But he could have asked somebody, taken a little more training and criticism and suggestions on board. Anyway, the Warrior University, I've told that story. I was there once. I saw it out in Phoenix. Warrior University was about as successful as Trump University. But then they get to the God damn it. This is where they outright lied, and this has already been debunked. The 1996 return, they said his father died and he missed a few shows and got in trouble over it. And I was sitting 4 feet from Vince McMahon when he got the goddamn fax sent to his house where Warrior had written in saying that he thought that it was bullshit that he was being treated in that fashion after his father had just passed away. He was already no-showing. He was no-showing over the trade show fiasco where he tried to leverage him into buying 1 million of his comic books at $1 a piece, and we'll forget the whole thing. And he was already missing shows. And then when Vince found out and relayed to me and Bruce, as a matter of fact, that Warrior's father had just passed away, Vince followed it up with he hates his father and hasn't spoken to him in 10 years. But at that point, he was using it as an excuse why he was not going to come back, since he had already started no-showing because he pitched a fit when they put his fucking face paint on the wall of the booth at the trade show. I was there. And that's when Vince was, at one point, going to do him like he did Sid and prorate Warrior's contract to where he didn't get his guarantee unless he made all the dates. And if he didn't make all of his dates, he would lose the amount of his guarantee that was prorated amongst his fucking amount of his contract. And it didn't even get there because they weren't going to speak after that. But anyway, and then they jump ahead to his speaking tour. Go ahead. Wait a minute. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, they answered the question. A lot of people were wondering, was the documentary going to deal with the most controversial, and I think a lot of people would say the worst part of his public life? And they answered that question. They skipped over WCW.
Yeah, that never happened. Well, see, that was the year that it was a Hogan dream, was that season. That's why he was seeing him in the mirror. And then the speaking tour, apparently anybody can get booked to speak to college students. Because what would be on this guy's resume that you would say, well, I'd like to have him come and give an insightful and inspiring speech to a bunch of college students about what? But he's booked to speak at the University of Connecticut and goes off about his whole right-wing conservative ideology, etc., and then gets mad at the gay folks. And if his wife tried to explain this, but she couldn't, she kind of hemmed and hawed. He just went off. And once again, why would you be? I can understand if you don't want to be gay. Why would you be so offended that other people are gay? Except was it a conservative right-wing thing, or was it a fanatical religion thing? Because those are the two usual suspects.
She tried to make it out, his wife, she tried to make it out like, Well, he was listening to a lot of talk radio, so he just started acting it out. He listened to a lot of Rush Limbaugh, so he just took on that persona. That was his latest addiction.
And remember, folks, they gave Dana Warrior a job on the creative team. I'm not saying she's a bad person.
I forgot about that. Oh, my God, I forgot about that.
Yes, I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm not attacking her as a person in any fashion. Anybody that wants to look at this show can come back and say, does that person need a job writing wrestling for a national promotion? Something that she has never, ever done before. That's the bone of contention I have here. They gave her a job after he died. They could have given her a check and just, and here you go. But to give her a job, it just insults anybody who actually was qualified for that job. Did you notice that they talked about the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, but nobody that was self-destructing him was on this show to really recant, except for Hulk Hogan, who's as phony as a get-well card from an Undertaker, and I wouldn't believe him if his tongue was notarized. They had video of Warrior ranting and raving on video from the basement, and his daughters like him.
Hey, let me ask you, what did you think about? I mean, there are plenty of people WWE have fallen out with over the years. That self-destruction DVD. What are your thoughts that they went that far to put that out?
I got a tickle out of it because I had heard a lot of these stories off air, but nobody had ever been allowed to fucking put them. And finally they said, you know what? They didn't phrase it. I talked to a couple of people that were involved. I won't say who, but, and I don't even, one of them may not have even made the cut of the final thing anyway. Nevertheless, they didn't say to these people that I talked to, we want you to bury him. They said, you can tell the truth. Just tell the truth. Whatever you've ever wanted to say about the Ultimate Warrior, you can tell the truth. You can say it. So it wasn't a hit piece. It was a true piece. And I can't remember, what had he done at that point that they were mad at him again? Had he tried to sue him again?
What was it that time?
I used to know.
I used to know too, and I can't remember because there were so many twists and turns in everything. That was because he had beaten them, I think, in court for something. And then they did that, and then he sued them again over that.
Yeah.
And then they countersued him, and I don't even know.
But anyway, and I mean, see, that's the thing. You can tell the guy was a mental wreck because in 2016 or 15, whatever the year was he won the Hall of Fame, he was tearing up in the car at the Hall of Fame weekend about the self-destruction DVD. Tearing up, not cussing mad like, well, I got the last laugh now, but tearing up. Like, of all the things that has ever happened to him in his life, that was the worst. And he apparently truly believed that he was the biggest star in wrestling and deserved it. And, you know, I blame Vince for giving the guy that mistaken belief, but I love, there's Warrior and Hulk's lying right to his face. I love you, man. You know, Hulk is a genius. He can say anything and still recant it later on with, a smile on his face. But yeah, so this whole show, and I did note here, Paulie gives great sound bites, but they made Randy Savage out to be a prick, one of the great talents ever. But this asshole comes off like an inspiration to humanity. And the VTR of his Raw promo after the Hall of Fame ceremony, he was still speaking gibberish. That when we had lunch with him that day on the way to WrestleMania 96, we had to stop in Arizona and see his place. And I'd listen to that whole Destrucity thing. The promos that he was doing, he sounded exactly like that when he was having a conversation and telling you things. And to the point where I took Bruce out as we were going to the car. We ate at one of those I can't remember what the fuck. It was a chain steak place, a Western theme. But anyway, we're going to the car, and I said, "Did you understand a goddamn word he said?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, what is he? Is he on? So what the fuck's his deal?" He said, "No, he always sounds like that. That's Warrior." There you go.
Well, that was the Ultimate Warrior biography. Of course, we'll have a review of the Ultimate Warrior Dark Side of the Ring. What's the name of it? Is it The Beginning of the Ultimate Warrior? Or I forget the name of it.
I'm not sure. It's not the self-destruction of. That was already taken.
But you can hear more about that. We'll review that on The Experience. But Jim, I think a lot of people see the Ultimate Warrior and they think, boy, that guy may be a nut.
Yes, folks, and if you haven't noticed over the past couple of weeks, Nuts.com is now a new official sponsor of the programs, and over the next several weeks, Brian will be working on his segues to try to be... You know what I say to people who don't like nuts? I say nuts to you. You no-good gum-bumping sacks of snake feces. You gotta like Nuts.com. It's the best-kept secret of savvy snackers across the country. They've got the white chocolate toffee cashews that I love, bourbon pecans, honey sesame sticks. They've got the pantry with incredible baking items, stuff for smoothies, rolled oats, beans, kid-friendly snacks, dried strawberries, custom trail mix. You can mix it and make it yourself. Plus all the raw, organic, roasted, salted, and candied nuts and chocolate-dipped nuts that you can imagine. Nutritious, delicious, healthy nuts, dried fruit, flowers, grains, and high-quality foods delivered straight to your door. Quicker than a hiccup. You order it one day, it goes out usually the same day, you get it the next day. It's quicker than going to the grocery store, especially if you live in Montana. So, Nuts.com. Brian, of course, you've already ordered 4 times because you got all the Rugrats there in the house. They're all over the nuts.
I like it as much as them. It is just great stuff. Everything they send is so good, and then you like it, and then you order more, and you're like, oh, I should try something else too. And it's just as good as everything else, so now you're just ordering more and more. We've ordered, you were wrong, it's been 3 times. The 4th order comes this week. Because I made the mistake of not asking one of my daughters what she wanted last time.
Uh-oh.
Although she enjoyed what we got, she didn't get to pick her individual thing.
She didn't get to pick her nuts.
No.
Well, folks, if you're a fan of picking your own nuts, I got news for you. You go to Nuts.com and you'll have all the nuts that you can say grace over. And right now...
And chocolates.
And chocolates.
And dried fruits.
And chocolate nuts and fruits. Fruits and nuts. And chocolate. Oh, my. If you go to Nuts.com, you can see all this stuff, but you can get a deal because they like us. If you text the word experience, they don't like you, Brian, and your show, The Drive Thru. They like my show, The Experience. But if you text the word experience, I will spell it for you. EXPERIENCE, text experience to 64,000. That's 64. With 3 zeros behind it, 64,000, text experience, and you'll get free shipping on your first order from Nuts.com. You'll go crazy for the nuts, folks. Terms apply. Available at Nuts.com/terms. Nuts!
All right, Jim. Well, let's get a couple questions in. Well, maybe more than a couple, but let's get some questions in starting now here on this show. And as I'm sure you're aware, a topic that a lot of people have sent in questions about is the recent passing of Don Kernodle.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Everyone wanted to know your thoughts, and if you ever worked with him, were you ever around him, and how much did you get to see him? Because obviously him and Slaughter were fantastic, but were you able to see that as was happening in 1982, 1983?
Only on tape. That was before we got to the Carolinas, but I was seeing the tapes of the TV shows. And yes, we worked with Don. I saw Don, just at several years ago at the Charlotte Fan Fest most recently. But yeah, the Midnight Express, we had matches with Don and different partners. When at the time that we got to the Carolinas, Don was still there, but Dusty wasn't using him as prominently as George Scott had. And Yes.
Not just George Scott. I mean, that's the thing. Dusty, I hate to interrupt you. I'm sorry. But
well, go ahead.
I do want to say Dusty blew it with Don Kernodle because there was something happening. He was a guy who got elevated with the program teaming with Slaughter. Coming out of that, they put him with Ivan Koloff. They turn him babyface against the Russians. He's super over. And then Dusty just, that's it. You know, your time's up.
Well, it's not that he finished him up, but he just used him in the middle of the card as one of the guys. And Don was a great worker, and he was a shooter too. As a matter of fact, the story was, and it's not just a story, it's real, that Bob Roop was doing a shooter gimmick in the Carolinas in 72, 73, that era of time, where he would accept challenges. And if you could beat him in 10 minutes or something, I mean, let's face it, Roop was a nationally ranked amateur, fucking pretty hotshot wrestler in his day, and nobody was going to beat him in 10 minutes that was making any of these challenges, right? But Kernodle tried. He had a good career as an amateur and a collegiate, and Les Thatcher mentioned on Twitter that he's the one that had him sign the release, because it's like you had to sign a release if you were going to do this. Hey, if you get hurt, you can't sue us. And they tried to talk him out of it. He said no, and so he didn't beat Roop. But the day after, or that night or whatever, Ole and Gene said, "Hey, kid, we want to break you into business." So that's how he got started. And kind of as a trivia note, do you know who else got started doing a shoot challenge with Bob Roop that they didn't win, but they were picked for to get the Roop angle over, but because he had a little amateur background in school?
William Harding.
No. Dennis Condrey.
Get out of here. I did not know that. Wow.
Dennis Condrey's brother-in-law was Joe Turner, who all worked as Joe Sky. Remember the team of Joe and Bill Sky? Joe Turner, Bowman. They had a kind of a cowboy gimmick. Anyway, Dennis had just got out of school and was, visiting or doing whatever. And they knew he had wrestled a little bit in school, and they needed guys to get the thing with Roop over. And they said, just don't get too smart ass with him and he won't hurt you. Well, but he hung in there. And so they said, yeah, well, we'll get you in the business. Anyway, with Kernodle, that was the thing. He was in really good shape. He was a really good worker. He wasn't how can I say this? He wasn't like a out of control or over the top or really colorful personality on his own, but especially as a team with Slaughter, Sarge, handled that part of it quite well. And Don had everything else going for him. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe Dusty just did, because Don was not a fucking wild man, and Dusty liked, big personalities. But yeah, we worked with him a number of times. And also his brother's name was Wally, but they called him Rocky. And Rocky did not resemble Sylvester Stallone. But he
resembled Keith Larson.
Yes. And Keith Larson was another name they gave him. But, Rocky Kernodle was they teamed them up sometimes when you could have the heels get the heat on Rocky, the younger brother that everybody knew was the younger, smaller guy, and then give Don the tag. But yeah, he was a good worker and a nice guy, friendly, no issues. It just, and he's another one of the guys that he got out of the business quicker than he probably would have, because there was no more territories. When he was finished with Crockett, I don't know did he ever show up in WWF? Some of the guys did, and you've forgotten about it.
The problem was, and it's always so weird the way this happened. So him and Slaughter have this run against Steamboat and Youngblood that we're still talking about today.
Yeah.
For good reason. So Slaughter goes back to the WWF in '83, where he had been previously a top heel a few years before that, before he went to Mid-Atlantic. He brings Kernodle with him. They push Slaughter the way they did previously, top heel, managed by the Grand Wizard. Kernodle's basically a job guy on TV. And I never understood what the hell just happened there. And then he went back to Mid-Atlantic and got used appropriately with the Ivan Koloff thing. But I don't I don't know what that was. And
Well,
I don't know, Dusty did not want to book him, it seemed like.
But that answers that question. He didn't go to the WWF after the last run with Crockett because he'd already seen what that was going to turn out like. Yeah. And there was no place else to go at that point. So, he's another one of the guys that just got out of the business early. But yeah, that, especially that program. And I mean, you can capture lightning in a bottle, as they used to say, sometimes in some places because of the exact situation and the combination of guys. And I mean, like we've mentioned, the Dream Machine should have got more chances than he got outside of the Memphis territory. Part of it was he didn't want to leave home, but here was a guy with sellouts of an 11,000 seat, arena on his record and still, never went anywhere. When you've got a tag team like Slaughter and Kernodle and Steamboat and Youngblood that did that massive house in Greensboro that led to Starrcade. They had to close the fucking interstate exits and have the radio announce, don't go to the Coliseum. It's sold out. They turned away 5,000 people or whatever the lore is. I talked to Sarge about it. I talked to Steamboat about it. The stories about them not physically being able to drive their vehicles to the Greensboro Coliseum and having to just stop and park their cars and walk to the building are true to get in. But after that was, like you said, with Slaughter and Kernodle, that was a huge run. They drew mega money and then, but
Dusty wasn't going to book. Well, I shouldn't say it this way, but after Slaughter leaves WWF, beginning of 1985, he ends up working Pro Wrestling USA and then pretty much primarily for the AWA, does indie shows. Dusty brings him in, I think, once. And it's like him and Kernodle and maybe Dusty, I forget, against like the three Russians. Big deal. Kernodle and Slaughter reuniting, this time as baby faces. But, there's a reason Steamboat left. There's a reason a lot of guys said that Dusty wasn't going to bring in anyone that would get over more than he was. I don't know if that's why Slaughter didn't come back, but you would think after WWF Carolinas, he's now a bigger star than ever before. It would make sense. He lives in the Carolinas, I think. But he ends up going to work for Vern.
Well, part of that was the national television, the ESPN, Sarge doing the G.I. Joe stuff. I think I would have liked to have seen Slaughter regularly in the Carolinas in working for Crockett at that point in time because of just the fact that he was a fantastic worker. But I don't know now looking back. It's just Dusty brought, and a lot of bookers do this. He brought his own combination in. And if you notice, he almost, except for Flair, which was a gimme, he almost stayed away from guys that were over in the Carolinas under previous administrations because he wanted to do his own thing and have his own crew. And, they did record business for a reason. So part of it is not just assembling everybody that's over in that territory. Part of it is when you're a booker is being able to see in your mind all the combinations and who you want everybody to work with. And, part of the thing with Sarge was maybe they thought, because part of the thing with G.I. Joe and being the hottest baby face in the business at the point in time there was you couldn't beat him very often or it kind of wore the fucking gimmick down. So I don't know, but that wouldn't have been the case with Don Kernodle anyway, when people say Dusty didn't book people because if they could get over bigger than him, because I don't know if anybody's made that claim about Don yet that he could have got over Dusty, but it is odd that Don, especially in that territory, was so over, but when Dusty was in charge, he just used him in the middle because he was there. But I'd seen Don Kernodle in Louisville in 1975 when he was almost a rookie. That was his second or third year in the business. And, he was an exciting young babyface, and he got to work a number of different promotions, Florida, I think Georgia for a while, Tennessee, both ends of Tennessee at that point in time. He'd been in the business by the mid 80s, 10 or 12 years, and had quite a bit of experience. So anyway, I hated to hear that. Last time I saw him, it's funny. I was always a fat fuck, and then I got out of the business and lost weight and watch my diet. All these guys were fucking physical specimens, and they get out of the business and they weigh 300 pounds. I'm liking the way I'm doing it. I'm thinking that might be the best fucking path, is to lose the weight at the end of the life instead of gain it. That's what I'm trying to do.
Don Kernodle. Never forgotten.
No, but he was a heck of a guy. And I'll tell you something else. Buddy Landell used to do an impersonation of Rocky, his brother. It would crack us up in the car because Rocky had big buck teeth. And he's working with Buddy Landell one night on TV. And Buddy was giving him his comeback, right? Well, Rocky was feeling, the people are screaming and cheering for him, and he's feeling it, and he's thinking he's a world beater, and he fucking shoots Buddy off. And as he shoots Buddy off, right as he lets go of him, he says, "Power slam." But the way he says slam, because he had the big teeth, power slam. And fucking, he's waiting to catch Buddy coming off with a fucking power slam, and Buddy came off with a right hand right to the fucking chops. Boom, put him down, hit him with the corkscrew elbow, 1, 2, 3. And come back in the locker room, he said, "He shot me off and called power slam." I wasn't going to go for that. Anyway, I like the Kernodles, though. They were fun. I guess Wally still is. He's still around.
I guess so. Well, Jim, we're still around, and we have a lot more show, a lot more wrestling to cover here. As I was saying, we have a lot of questions that have. What do you have?
Huh?
What do you have? You have some kind of paper.
I've just got something I'm reading while you're talking. We got some of the readers. We have an incredibly astute viewership and listenership, and the Cult of Cornette members. They're well-learned individuals on a variety of subjects. And it was in the news recently that the Fulham Football Club that Tony Khan operates, manipulates, sometimes masturbates, was relegated. They were put down. We couldn't explain what relegating was. It was they've been demoted. But and this brought into account a lot of the animosity that the British people have and the English football fans have for Tony Khan in general. Well, now we have an email that explains what relegation is and a little bit about the background of their football club. Would you like to hear about this? How Tony's doing in his other professional sports venture?
Sure.
Hi, Jim and Brian. See, he did mention you. This is from Sam in London. You guys seemed a little confused by what relegation is in an English football context, so I thought I'd give you a crash course in the structure of English football, as well as a brief comparison of Fulham Football Club under the Khans compared to their previous owner. The English Football League consists of 96 teams, which are divided into 4 divisions. The divisions have changed names over the years. For ease, I will refer to them by their original names of Division 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, that's helpful. Division 1 currently being denominated the Premier League, so they're the best of the best. Division 1 consists of 20 teams and the others of 24. Each team in the division plays every other team in the division at their home stadium, meaning each team plays each other twice over the course of a 9 and a bit month season. If you win a game, you get 3 points. If you draw, you get 1. If you lose, you get none. At the end of the season, the teams in each division are ranked in order of points, and the teams at the top of Division 1 are the English Football League champions. The top 5 to 7 teams in Division 1 are selected to represent England in competition the following year against the top teams from other European leagues. And the team at the bottom of Division 4 is relegated from the Football League, being replaced by the team who finished top of the far more complex non-league pyramid, which eventually contains every registered club in England. The teams that finish in the bottom 3 of Division 1 and the bottom 4 of Divisions 2 and 3 are relegated to the division below and are replaced by the teams that finish at the top of the division below them, with one promotion spot to each division determined by a 4-team playoff. So this is just as easy to understand as the rules of AEW. Fulham Football Club is London's oldest football club, founded in the 1870s, but they have never been a particularly successful team. By the 1990s, they had reached their lowest ebb. They were struggling in Division 4 and facing the prospect of being relegated from the Football League altogether. At this point, an eccentric millionaire, Muhammad Al-Fayed, owner of Harrods, bought the club and oversaw a large investment in the team, which proved hugely successful. Fulham charged up the Football League structure and eventually became firmly established in the Premier League Division 1 and began competing for and at times obtaining the coveted top 7 positions that gave entry to lucrative European completion. However, despite the on-field success, Mr. Al-Fayed's relationship with the fans was souring, and after a particularly ferocious backlash to his decision to erect a statue of Michael Jackson on the club's home ground, he sold the club to Shahid Khan. Fulham were promptly relegated to Division 2 and have since become a yo-yo team. That is, one that is relegated one year and promoted the following, never able to establish themselves in the top division. I hope this makes things clearer for you both when you hear news of British opinion of Tony Khan. Well, I'll tell you what, that couldn't be clearer in my mind now. The entire summary of the rules and the standings and the way that these things are determined and figured out over there in the English Football League, I think that anything that could possibly be written about the way that football teams are ranked is right here in this one email. Do you agree, Brian?
I don't know, I guess.
I don't have a goddamn clue still to this, after I've just read this thing, what the fuck they're doing over there, but apparently Fulham is not a very good club, and the only time that they were a good club, the people revolted when they put up a statue of Michael Jackson. Got questions?
Nope, and I know you don't have answers. So this is where we are right here, drowning together on the drive-thru. Let's get some questions, Jim.
That's what I said. You got some questions.
Got some questions.
I got some answers.
Well, Jim, a topic that a lot of people have sent in questions about in the last 24 hours or so, give or take, has been Kenny Omega. Apparently some conversation about him is stirring up.
I could have read some more emails rather than going there.
This could be interesting. He's in the news. People are talking about him, and it's stirring up some interesting conversation.
Did he get run over?
He did not get run over.
Ah, shucks. Well, you said he was in the news and people were talking about him.
Jim Ross, I have a quote here. I think it's from an interview of some sort. He said, "I don't think anybody is better than Randy Orton in the wrestling business. Of course, that's so subjective. I love Randy's work, although I don't watch it regularly enough to make a great evaluation. In the last several months that I have tuned in to watch some of Randy's segments, he doesn't disappoint." I guess he's watching different segments that we
I was about to say maybe he's not watching anything involving The Fiend. I can see where maybe he hasn't watched Randy in a year or so.
No matter
I can see where he's going.
No matter how the creative is packaged to him, he doesn't disappoint. But anyway, here's the second part of the quote. "I'm sure there's Kenny Omega fans out there that would say Omega is the best wrestler in the world. Some will. And they got the right to their opinion, and I'm not going to argue it. Omega is really freaking good. In any event, it's a good time to be a fan. A lot of great talent out there, improving their game, adapting, and adding things." So, Jim, apparently this seems like a rather benign statement.
I was about to say he's trying to, be happy and positive and uplifting, and a lot of great talent out there. It's in the Federal Witness Protection Program, but
what he said here, really not about what he said about Kenny, I think more about the fact that he said good things about Randy Orton and said he's the best in the world, triggered a lot of people to rush to social media in the defense.
Because I would have said that maybe last year before I saw Orton versus The Fiend. So it's not far off, but it's just that, it may not be current.
So any other thoughts about Jim Ross's statement here before we go to the next statement we have?
Well, no, and I'm, and JR saying he doesn't watch it, as regularly as he used to. And boy, we can identify with that. But I can see a lot of people saying Randy Orton because his work is impeccable as far as everything looks good, nothing's stupid, everything means something. He knows what he's doing. I can see JR being, a traditionalist would go with Randy. I think currently today, from what it may be tough and also just because Randy's been in that shit with the Fiend and the girl on the swing puking pea soup and all that stuff. If somebody said Walter to me, it would be hard to argue with that because, as I've said before, he's probably the best I've seen, and I don't know how long, maybe ever, at being himself, at doing what he would do. And there's no foolishness, and all his shit's good, and he's more modern.
You have a problem with Roman Reigns?
I wouldn't have a problem with Roman Reigns because then you've got the guy that's the modern day complete total package. He can talk, he can work, he looks good, he's being pushed in the spot. He's got the only manager of any, meaningful note in the business today. So, you could definitely say that. I would never in a million years say Harpo, but I'm sure some people would because, as we've established, some people like to have their balls nailed to a step stool. But it's, some of it is taste and some of it is just obviously observing what you're seeing in front of your eyes.
Well, Jim, after the controversy apparently got started by Jim Ross making this statement.
Well, this wasn't like a provocative statement. It wasn't like anything out of left field or something that a lot of people wouldn't say already. So why did that cause any controversy?
As we have witnessed in real time with AEW and specific AEW wrestlers, anything said that could be in any way perceived as a slight is met with an immediate wall of defense, as we have seen.
Well, who's defending it?
Well, Jim Ross makes this statement. Again, I think Randy Orton's the best in the world. Kenny Omega is really good too, and I know some people would think him, but I don't think so. That's what Jim Ross basically said. Chris Jericho tweeted out, "In my opinion, Kenny Omega is the best wrestler in the world today. Others may feel differently, but I've been in the ring with everybody currently working on top, and there's nobody close. That's why Kenny is AEW champ, the most protected title in the biz."
The what?
It's impossible to argue.
Well, no, it's not. It's quite easy to argue. The most protected title in the biz. They're having a title match with their fucking school mascot on their next pay-per-view. How is that protecting their world title? Just that statement alone, before we analyze the other horse shit about him being in the ring with everybody and Twinkle Toes is the best, which is ludicrous, and he wouldn't be saying that except for the fact that he probably got a bonus from Tony Khan for saying that. But what the fuck did he just say? Give me that again. That he just what the fuck is he talking about? The most protected title. How is it protected? It actually is protected.
It's protected now. Because remember, it was stolen when Chris Jericho won it, and someone took it from the fucking car.
The cops had to get it back. When Jericho had it.
The most protected title in the business. It was stolen.
But he's acting like either that it's protected because everybody's out to get it. No, the only people going after it are people that work for the boss. And it's not protected in any way by booking because goofs like fucking My Little Dog Pockets are in world title matches, which is a joke to begin with.
But it doesn't
So
change hands. It doesn't change hands every week, so it's protected.
Oh, God, it could be because nobody else wants it. But I don't. That's why that I'm roll my eyes at these guys that have to hang on past the time that they should have made their graceful exit from the ring as active participants at the age of 50 or whatever. And instead, he's got to take a contract to hang out with the cool kids and put them over and somehow try to convince wrestling fans, don't pay attention to what you see in front of your eyes. This fucking Harpo Marx looking, fucking prissy prancing, finger pointing, fancy dancing fucking goof who asses off and tells his manager to 69 him on national TV and has matches with small children and wrestles sex dolls, whether in front of people or not. We don't know what he's doing in private. And wants to book Japanese fetish objects as wrestlers on national TV, and et cetera, et cetera. Somehow, Jericho has taken on the task of trying to convince wrestling fans that this fucking nattering nincompoop, Kenny Omega, is the greatest wrestler in the world. And all he's doing is ruining his own credibility. Because the only people that are going to believe that are the people that already believe it, and you can't smarten them up, apparently. But no, in any serious discussion by people who are not being fucking paid money to fucking say that, Twinkle Toes McFingerbang is not the greatest wrestler in the world or even close and would not be in the conversation except to be scoffed at because, oh, and by the way, yeah, you know who all these fucking idiots say is the best? Twinkle Toes. That's how he's in the conversation of anybody who knows what the fuck they're talking about who the best wrestler in the world is. Now, I must admit, I would love to see Twinkle Toes and Walter. That's about the only time I'd want to see Twinkle Toes. But anyway, Jericho's fucking, I mean, he's lost his credibility a while back. He can't even keep his own family from trying to overthrow the government. He's going to pick the greatest wrestler in the world.
I think one of Jericho's biggest problems is he's not starting the day with a proper breakfast.
You know, that's right. Because I think that's why that he's got that grumpy look on his face all the time, not to mention that inflated spare tire around his midsection. Folks, I now weigh less than Chris Jericho does. Let that settle in. And you know why? Because I'm watching my diet, I'm watching my health, and part of that, as you mentioned, Brian, is getting the day kicked off with a healthy breakfast. And regardless of what kind of diet you are on or what kind of special needs that you need in your eating, the folks at Magic Spoon can take care of it, because not anymore is sugar and junk and carbs the only thing that your cereal is made of. You're not a kid anymore. You can't eat all that stuff. Your parents might have not let you eat it to begin with, but now, if you're trying to cut down on carbs, sugar, and unhealthy food, don't drink protein shakes and powder and all that stuff when you can have a delicious bowl of cereal, courtesy of Magic Spoon. 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving, 140 calories a serving. It's keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, low-carb, and GMO-free, but not taste-free. And you can build your own box in the available flavors to make your own custom bundle like cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry, and cinnamon. You mix the cocoa with the peanut butter, it tastes like a Reese cup. And, you know, I know you guys are eating this stuff because your whole family grazes, but I'm not a grazer on healthy shit. I don't like to do that. But this stuff tastes good, so you'll forget that it's healthy. And you can walk around eating it like candy, or you could eat it out of a bowl like some civilized people eat their cereal. Regardless, if you go to magicspoon.com/Jim and grab a custom bundle of cereal to try today, if you use that promo code Jim at checkout, you'll save $5 off of your order. So remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/Jim. Use the code Jim to save $5. Grab your own custom bundle with all of those delicious flavors that you love.
All right, well, let's get some more delicious questions that you'll love, Jim.
I'm still waiting for one.
Oh, come on. This has been good so far. Well, let's see how this one goes. This next one, sent in on Twitter using a hashtag CornyDriveThru from P85.
What?
MLW.
Wait, what?
P85.
P85 is the name of the person.
That's right.
Okay.
MLW is having a draft, and the first pick for the company was Davey Richards. I was wondering about Jim's thoughts and experience working with him. Richards versus Black at DBDH8 would be in my top 10 matches for 35 years old. I guess in 35
Death before
years.
dishonor. By the way.
Okay. Well, Davey Richards returning apparently to professional wrestling. What are your thoughts on that and working with Davey?
You know, I'm excited about that. I'm hoping that he's focused on this and really wants to do it, because he was an amazing talent. The first time I saw him, 2009 in Ring of Honor, he reminded me of a little bit of Dynamite Kid, a little bit of Chris Benoit, the intensity, the fucking way that he could do some of that shit without killing himself or anybody else, quite frankly. He was training in MMA. At the same time, he was, able to do the flying shit. He wasn't completely focused on the wrestling business because he was constantly trying to decide whether he was going to leave and go be an emergency medical technician and a fireman, or whether he was going to stick with wrestling, and back and forth. And that's why I've said sometimes he would just blurt things out, like he was going to retire, or he was. One time, he asked me and Delirious if it was okay if he asked his girlfriend to marry him in the ring at the Manhattan Center in New York after his match. And I said, that's probably not the time to do that. But there were things going on, right? And it would not have been a smooth transition. But the point is, he didn't end up marrying that girl anyway. So I'm glad he didn't. That's what we had to deal with, was a baby face that was constantly saying things that he would have to take back, or getting in an issue that I love Kyle O'Reilly too, and Tony Kozina, who was another one of their training partners, but they did a dine and dash on some outlaw promoter in Idaho one day when they got out there in the middle of it was Idaho or Iowa, somewhere way far away from humanity. And they're out in the middle of nowhere, and they get there for the first of a couple of shows, and the guy tells them, well, I'm changing the match, and I don't have money, and this and that. And so he says, well, what do you have? And he said, well, I got like half, and then they took it and took off. So I wake up one morning and turn on the internet, and there's Ring of Honor stars involved in Dine and Dash on promoter in Iowa. But Davey's a tremendous talent. If he's focused on this and wants to give it his all, because he's very determined and very dedicated, he would just change his mind a lot. He had a lot. It was Ric Flairish sometimes in that regard. But if he's focused on this and determined and wants to do it and still in shape, he's had a couple of years off because he was beating his body up bad. Yeah, I'm a fan of his as a wrestler. Davey Richards and Tyler Black in Toronto in the summer of 2011 was one of the best matches I've ever seen live. That's why I said, to me, I had just seen the modern day updating of Flair and Steamboat by watching Tyler Black and Davey Richards. It was a little bit faster paced, as you would expect, and they did more big stuff, but they still did it at a high level, and the people went nuts over it. And there was nothing silly, there was nothing stupid and phony. Those guys still in that era in Ring of Honor were not guys that were waiting around standing to catch guys making little fucking pissy-ass pussy dives. They were fucking diving and blistering each other, if they did it at all. So I was a big fan of Davey's. I'm glad to see him back. I just hope he sticks with it and stays focused on it, because he's very, very good. But that was a wonderful class of talent there at that time. Davey, Eddie Edwards, his partner, Roderick Strong, O'Reilly, Adam Cole, Jay Lethal, the Briscoes, Claudio and Hero for a bit of a time there. Add guys like Haas and Benjamin and Rhino and some of the guys that we had, Lance Storm coming in for a few shots. That was a tremendous in-ring group of guys, and Davey stood out as one of the best. And I really, it's sad when you think about it. If the timing had been different, and Sinclair Broadcasting bought Ring of Honor and put it on television and saved it from going out of business, but at the same point, they didn't hop in with, I'm not saying hop in with both feet. They didn't even really hop in with one foot. They kind of stuck a toe in compared to what I thought they were going to do financially to get things started. And it got off on such a wrong foot for a few years there. But if instead of a kid, the frustrated fantasy booker whose father has a bunch of money and can get him anything he wants, and he chose comedy wrestling, if somebody with the backing to really flesh out that group of guys in Ring of Honor and that level of talent that was available at that point in time in the business, with the UFC and all those guys cross-training in pro wrestling and MMA, it could have been a sports-based presentation. It could have been a legitimate sport that you weren't embarrassed to look at or you didn't laugh at when you watched it, and it could have stirred people up. And guys like Davey, they were part of that stuff because you could see them being an athlete in either sport, pro wrestling or UFC, mixed martial arts. And I think Kyle's done tremendously well with that to this day. So that's what I thought it could have been. That's what I wished it could have been. The timing wasn't right. And instead, as I've mentioned, along comes a guy after all this time to put the money in it and has the resources to do things. And we get sketch comedy because, you can have the resources, but probably the hardest job in wrestling is being able to spot and pick talent and put that talent together in a cohesive whole. And that's where poor Tony, so this is what we've got. Instead of something that could tickle the fancy of the younger fans and look more like mixed martial arts and be cool young guys kicking the shit out of each other with good music and, nice production, we get fucking midgets and cosplayers fucking jacking off and tickling each other's taint because they think they're all fucking funny. And that's what wrestling is now. And that's the idea that people are going to have of it for the next 10 or 15 years. So it's pretty much too late to do anything about it. Thanks for bringing that up and bringing me down there, Brian.
Well, what I was going to say is, your Ring of Honor run is one that people still talk about. There are a lot of the people who have problems with you that always point to your Ring of Honor run. I don't know if that's the answer to this, but you talking about Ring of Honor made me think of this, and this question was right here on Twitter. Using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Cravo, or Cravo, don't know for sure. Hey, Jim.
Is there a Drava over the A?
There is not. Hey, Jim, what would be your biggest regret in your career?
Oh, God, besides not fucking just taking a fucking stick and coming up behind Russo?
Yes, and thank you for saying that in a YouTube-appropriate way.
Okay, yeah, because you've mentioned before in the past when I talk about brains turning to jelly and things, yeah. Yeah, I didn't mention any brain, animal, vegetable, mineral brains, fake brains, brains in movies. I don't know. But anyway,
biggest regret.
Well, I could not sticking out WCW.
Not for the sticking out?
Well, not sticking it out where me and Bobby and Stan could have all left together, but then maybe they still would have kept Bobby. But it was kind of me getting mad that caused us to break up 6 months early when I got mad at fucking Ole.
And who knows what happens, because if you stick it out, Dusty's back, and maybe he could sweet talk you a little bit.
Yeah, but Herd was still there, and I was already looking forward to Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I just wanted all three of us to go. Wasting some time, to be honest, with Ring of Honor. That was a year and a half that I spent trying to fucking get that thing done. And then, to basically be blistered and ostracized by everybody for, oh shit, Cornette fucking wrecked Ring of Honor when I saved Ring of Honor. And it was out of business unless I came there, which has been fucking validated, and the story's told by everybody from Kerry Silken on down. But also that I believed that Sinclair was going to do what we had pitched them to do when they bought the company. And that wasn't the case. They bought it and then, well, let's see how cheap we can be for as long as we can be. My thought was they were going to buy the equipment, the TV equipment, the world-class website, which was the key to the whole thing, these internet pay-per-views. And imagine that, everybody being able to send us money around the world and watch our shows from everywhere around the world. It's worked out good 10 years later. But we ended up with Greg the Office Boy and his fucking college friends website and stuck with Go Fight Live and all that shit. And I think if I had it to do over again, I would have just probably fucking stayed home and rested. I thought it was going to go farther, quicker. It did not. But to take all the fucking heat from fucking, and part of it I didn't mind, because the part that was the old Ring of Honor fans that actually thought when Jack Evans was there, that was the golden era of Ring of Honor, when all the guys in the fucking company were 140 pounds, 17 years old, and just doing every move they knew. I didn't care what those fans thought, because they were going to be pissed off that they weren't in a private club anymore, that this thing was out on television now where everybody could get a good taste of it. But being hamstrung by Joe Koff telling me, well, don't go out and fucking tell everybody that Go Fight Live fucked this thing up, because we still might want to deal with them. Why? Or don't go out and apologize for this or that we fucked up. Go out and tell them they're lucky they got it for fucking as little money as they did. And all that shit. That's when a lot of the newer fans, when I'd been saying, oh, this is going to be so great, they're like, well, fuck, apparently it's not. Cornette, you're nuts. So that I probably took a few years off that in 2 years, just a 2-year period, trying to get Ring of Honor and Sinclair Broadcasting and the wrestling business and everybody all together on the same page. I had my first ever treadmill heart stress test. I was having chest pains. I was goddamn back up to 250 fucking pounds. So as I look back now and how much happier I've been since that was over with, I might have fucking dodged that 2 or 3 year period there. But other great regrets. I'm
sorry, go ahead.
Shit, I wish I had, got a chance to get so-and-so's, I had a chance. When I had a chance to get so-and-so's autograph because I didn't know they were going to die later and I didn't look like a mark, stuff like that. But, as far as in the business, except for breaking up the Midnight Express and, did I regret Smoky Mountain Wrestling? Didn't go? Yes, I would have stayed there forever because it was regional territorial wrestling. But it would have cost me a lot of money because if we were just making a decent profit, I would have never left there and turned down everything else I've done since then, where I made a whole lot more money. So there's positive and negatives to be said about everything. What were you going to say?
Any regrets when not holding on a little bit longer with Smoky Mountain Wrestling?
No, we talked about that. I was fucking burnt, and a year would have been a long fucking time. And wrestling was still going to get a tad bit worse before it got any better. So probably not that. I wish I'd have started it about 3 years later. Then we'd all be farting through silk. But no, not really.
All right.
I wish I hadn't had to, but I wasn't unhappy when I did.
Any promos you regret?
Only ones that I go back and look at and say, oh shit, I could have done that better, or boy, why didn't I say such and such? But I'm never like, oh shit, even the chicken joke in the NWA, that's why I wouldn't apologize for it. Because it didn't fucking mean anything bad to anybody by it, and I wasn't sorry I said it. And I wasn't gonna goddamn put up with somebody apologizing for me when they're the ones that fucking aired it. So I don't regret it. It would have been easier handled either if it was just edited out before it aired and I wouldn't have said anything, or if Liver Lip Lagana had grouped himself in that apology and phrased it more as Cornette told an old joke that a lot of the people didn't understand these days instead of made offensive comments and didn't describe what they were. But so I don't regret that line because I wasn't trying to piss anybody off. And as a matter of fact, I'll mention this. I'm still not sure if I ever see Nick Aldis again, and I'll speak to him. Just because the statement that he made after that came up, when he said, well, people's trying to say things just to be shocking, I don't think belongs here. Like, that's the thing that if I was going to say something to try to shock people, Brian, I'm there for 2 days. And I'm going to try to shock people, and that's the thing I'm going to come up with. Fucking hell. So I'm just, I'm like Jerry Jarrett. I regret some of the people I've got in the wrestling business with more than getting in the wrestling business. But now I can't remember anything else I would have said besides if it sucked or I fumfered it or didn't say something the way I wanted, that a promo that I regret doing.
All right, Jim, our next question sent via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Sheila Grunwald in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Grunwald?
It's always astounded me how much you put down Hulk Hogan every chance you get. Along with Vince McMahon, Hulk Hogan has revolutionized the wrestling business. Has he not? Sure, there are other more talented in-ring workers and better promos, but when it comes down to it, no one tops Hogan in terms of all-around influence. I understand he has done some questionable things in the past, but it doesn't take away from what he has given to the business of pro wrestling. So why don't you, Jim and Brian, give Hogan all the credit he deserves instead of constantly bashing him?
We have given him credit that he deserves. He's one of the biggest gate attractions in the history of wrestling. He was the guy in the 80s. And I mentioned earlier in the program, compared to the Ultimate Warrior, Hogan could work. Just not well. He wasn't a big bumper. But the only thing that we've ever taken Hogan to task about is the obvious, that he lies like Donald fucking Trump. He's the most exaggerating, fabricating, outright fucking out of thin air bullshit. Remember in his book, he said he wrestled 400 times a year because when he would fly back from Japan, he'd cross the international date line and wrestle twice in the same day.
Remember when he said Metallica wanted him to be their bass player?
Yes. Remember when he said anything he's ever said? And that's why I've always said he's Hulk Hogan. He was already the biggest star in the business. He's already been in movies. He's already a cultural icon of some description. You don't need to keep exaggerating and lying. And remember that just in the show, the Savage hit piece that they did, where he said, yeah, I started all the wrestlers moving to Tampa. Yeah, when you were a fucking bass player in a bar band and all the wrestlers lived there because that was the goddamn seat of the territory.
Remember when he said that The only reason it was a George Foreman grill was because he missed the phone call from the grill people.
Yeah, they called him first, and he missed it, so Foreman got it. There's something about, I expect any day, thing was, I was going to take that day off, but it was Sunday and God was resting, so I went ahead and fucking turned the lights on or whatever. I mean, it's insane. That's what we give him the shit for, because he's full of shit as a Christmas turkey. As Mama Cornette would say, he's so full of shit, his eyes are brown. He just exaggerates, lies, and or fabricates
easily
some really ridiculous stuff.
Very easily. It doesn't seem like there's any effort involved. It just, he starts talking, and at some point you're like, okay, and then it's like, whoa,
yeah,
he's just saying stuff now.
So that's what we give him shit for.
Remember he body slammed Andre, and then Andre died days later? Remember that one?
Well, and they were still telling the deal of, and how did this get in the Warrior piece? By the way, we forgot about that because they did the side tangent of, Andre and Hogan or whatever, but they're still telling the story that they weren't sure what Andre was going to do. And, he probably avoided Hogan in the locker room because he wanted to fucking play cards. And how long do you need to talk about that match? It's a body slam and a leg drop. Right? And it's Andre. He didn't give, but there was never any Andre ain't going to do the job. And I guarantee you, he didn't call the slam on the sperm of the moment. That was the finish. All along. Slam, leg drop. But so that's the thing. You can't believe anything that Hulk Hogan says.
But you're not bashing him in terms of his place historically in wrestling history.
No, and I've said I was always a Flair guy. Like Flair said, when Hogan was already out of the shower and back at the hotel bar, he was still in the fucking ring. I didn't like Hulk Hogan's matches for the most part because he didn't put a lot of fucking effort into them. It was all sizzle and no steak. That's what Vince liked. In Japan, he showed what he could do a bit. But as far as him and Flair was my guy. Flair was my world champion. That's a world champion of professional wrestling. Hulk Hogan can say his prayers and eat his vitamins. But yes, he was a big fucking megastar. And God, can you imagine if you could find a Hulk Hogan today that would tower over these children, that could fucking go out there and talk to people and get them involved and then fucking slay some fucking monsters? Maybe that would rejuvenate the business. I can't think of what else might.
Hey, here's a question for you, because you mentioned a Hulk Hogan to go out there and talk to the people. What do you think is more effective, Hulk Hogan's promos in 1983 in the AWA or Hulk Hogan's promos in the late 80s WWF? Because it definitely changed. It became more theatrical and screaming. But in 83, he got that entire fucking state of Minnesota behind him.
Yeah, no, well, 83 was better because it was before he jumped the shark and went over the top. Once he got up to Fantasyland. The earlier stuff, he was still wrestling. He hadn't had Vince telling him the word sports entertainment in his ear all the time. But the promos that get you over and the matches that get you over when you're not over and suddenly you get over because of those things are usually better than the ones you do later on when you're already over. He was becoming more of a parody of wrestling and a parody of himself with the brother and all this shit and the blah, 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 because that's the way Vince was going. And Warrior having those stroke interviews, but Hogan was already over at that point. As a matter of fact, you could argue that from 1989, 1990, for the next couple of years, he got less over instead of more over.
Yeah. No, I think from 89, I think there is a line from No Holds Barred right around the same time the Warrior became the biggest thing with kids my age. 1989, the Warrior feuding with Rick Rude and Bobby Heenan, which means the Heenan family, Haku, eventually Andre the Giant, even Tully and Arn are in the mix. That's the Warrior's feud every week. Meanwhile, you're seeing Hogan footage of him on the set and clips of him and Zeus. And then Zeus is there and Zeus is going to wrestle Hogan started losing popularity with me and my friends right there, and the Warrior was all we cared about. And that was why Hogan, he started changing. He wasn't the Hogan he had been a few years earlier.
And is a little more Hollywood.
A lot more
Hollywood. Yeah. I would say that would be the case. So I would prefer the earlier Hogan because that's what was getting him over.
Well, Jim, that question was about your takes on Hulk Hogan. We have another question about another take that you've given about a wrestling personality. This one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Dan in Australia. I love your blistering takes on the crappier side of modern wrestling. However, I notice you tend to shy away from ever blistering or blaming Vince McMahon for awful WWE segments or booking decisions. You say things like, "Oh, it's because of those dozens of useless writers," or "That's not the Vince I knew from 20 years ago." But now we have zombies around the ring as lumberjacks and eating John Morrison and frog-face Miz. Can you just cut the shit and say, this was fucking awful, and the only reason it appears on WWE television is because Vince McMahon wanted it to? Or are you still angling for a Hall of Fame induction one day?
I would say that it would be both of their faults. I'm going to say right now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Vince McMahon has never had the idea that zombies should eat any wrestler on one of his programs. That came from the writers. Vince then said okay for some reason because whatever's happened, and Vince is either on medication or not on medication. I'm not sure what has caused Vince to be the Vince of today. But I take Vince to task all the time. I take Vince to task about shit that he did while I was fucking there. But part of it is the Ole Anderson rule, in that I used to think Vince was bad, but so many other motherfuckers have come along that have stupider ideas about wrestling than Vince that he's moved up the ladder. We've said has been, and I don't know about now, but for 40 years he was a great promoter. Not ever said he was a great booker, and he's never been a finish guy. And he has that bizarre thing in his head where he wants wrestling to be phony and just a show. And he's made it work for his company, and it's doomed the entire rest of the business because that's not the way wrestling works. So now it's shot. But do we take it easy on Vince? Or, I'm not trying to, but at the same point, I've known him and worked with him, and I don't understand how anybody can even think they would have pitched something like this to Vince 20 years ago and not been fired, as I've mentioned, drug tested, whacked over the head with a briefcase, whatever. This is stuff that Vince would have scoffed at or looked at you like you were out of your mind. And I'm wondering if, how much does he just not give a fuck anymore? I don't know.
What's scarier is he gives a fuck.
Okay, I can't explain it, but I'm not trying to take it easy on Vince. But at least I know that Vince McMahon has in the past done things that were valuable in the wrestling business of some description, whereas these comedy writers have never done anything valuable anywhere. So it's easy for me to pick on them. But I don't think it's taking it easy on Vince when you and I both are out here all the time talking about how, well, the goddamn Raw show is so fucking rotten. We'd rather have our fucking second circumcision of the day than fucking watch it or whatever. But no, I'm not hangling or angling, either one, for a Hall of Fame induction. That horse has left the barn. I'd have to go out in public to accept it at this point. So that horse has left the barn a long time ago.
Yeah, unfortunately for me, if I'm angling for a job with WWE, Vince will forget everything I just said in about a minute.
Oh, see? Come on. Now,
see, that's what I'm talking about. I say bad things about Vince all the time.
I hate to see him looking human. That's something that we thought would never happen.
All right, well, let's get our next question here. And I don't know why. And I tried to search to see if there was something out there. I don't see anything.
You don't know why. You can't explain. Dun, dun.
That's right. The Who.
You can't explain.
The Who. I named the band. You can stop singing. And you messed up the lyrics. But anyway, I can't explain that, why, I should say, this question is coming from a few people. But I'll read one from this gentleman, and maybe independent of the others. Sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Kevin Woods. Hi, Mr. Cornette. I found out about your channel some days ago. Do you think that DX is the best tag team ever? If not, can you name a better tag team? And
How much time you got?
And there are a few other messages we got that said, what do you think about DX as the best tag team of all time? I don't know if there's some article or something out there, but what are your thoughts?
Combination of DX.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
I'm guessing not the New Age Outlaws, because they are an actual tag team with a tag team name. So then you're talking Shawn and Hunter?
What? The answer is yes. Down through history, there have been numerous hundreds of tag teams better than those combinations that we just mentioned, and that's not being disrespectful. I guess it might be most disrespectful to Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, but I mean, let's face it, they were a good team, and Road Dogg had the promo, and Billy was a hell of an athlete, and they were in a hot period in a good spot, but they weren't Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens, or the Midnight Express, or the Rock and Roll Express, or the Road Warriors, or the goddamn Bruiser and Crusher, or Rocca and Perez, or and on and on and on and on and on. So there was no combination of people in DX, either ones that actually worked as a team or ones that you could just make up, that were the greatest tag team ever in the world. No.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from the Iceman Parsons Project.
Oh, that's great. I don't care what the question is. That's the greatest fucking name I've ever heard.
Jim, what exactly is a damager?
Well, that was a guy named Danny Holly from Seymour, Indiana, that was the third most famous resident of Seymour, Indiana, after John Cougar Mellencamp and Rip Rogers. And I said the same thing, because before I came to OVW, he was already here. And I was reading the descriptions of the results from OVW or whatever, but I hadn't talked to Danny Davis about the roster yet. And this was when I was preparing to leave Connecticut, come back to Louisville, and we were going to do the developmental program at OVW. And I said, Danny, one day, I said, who is Damaja? And he laughed. He said, no, it's Damaja. I said, okay, now I get it. The Damaja, I'm going to damage you. That was basically Danny's picked his own gimmick and his own name when he started training with Rip and Danny Davis. Danny Holly, I should say. There's two Dannys there. Danny had trained Doug Basham first. Doug was his nephew. And then they started OVW, him and Rip, as a training school, and they trained Nick Dinsmore and Rob Conway. And then probably about 6 months before I came down in summer of 99, Damaja showed up, and they were all amazed by his aptitude. Not only was he was 6'2" or 6'3" and like 220, 230 and 19 years old, but you couldn't blow him up. And they were masters at blowing guys up. His cardio was ridiculous, and he got he was a fan. He'd watched wrestling. So he got the business visually. He could see it in his head. He got it mentally. Having Rip and Danny as trainers, you learn to think about wrestling the right way instantly. And I started watching the tapes, and I said, this fucking kid, how long has he been training? At that time, he'd started in December of 98 or whatever, and it was May of 99. I said, all right, I can do something with this fucking guy. And as soon as I got here, the one thing was he had a manager her name was Treasure. And I've said they must have named her that because of that sunken chest that she had. Because she had, some way or another, she was the girlfriend of one of the guys that had been in the class and et cetera, and she'd become a manager, but she was like 10 years older than Damaja and looked like it. And I said, and he was a heel at that point. I said, this guy is 19, 20 years old. He's going to be cool for the young people. So even before I'd got here, I started booking the show and faxing it down to Danny, and I split them up real quick. And then for the next 3 or 4 years, he was one of the 4 pillars of the company. I mean, you had guys like Flash Flanagan. You had guys, Trailer Park Trash was still working at the time, and you had a few veterans that could come in and out and work with the guys. But the pillars in the ring, my best workers, the best students that Danny and Rip had, and all homegrown guys were Doug Basham, Nick Dinsmore, Rob Conway, and the Damaja. And so they bounced the OVW championship back and forth amongst all of them. When Mike Bucci, Nova, came in, he had enough experience. I put him right in that mix. But generally, it was Damaja, Basham, Conway, and Dinsmore teaching all the guys at the start of the developmental program in the ring as well, because they were on the job training. They were the best workers and the farthest along, so I'd put them in with guys that were coming up. So and then finally, of course, obviously, they ended up, Doug Basham and Damaja were the best heel tag team in the business in 2004. Fucking athletic, young, ripped. Basham was fucking ripped. He had like 4% body fat. Dano was never a fucking bodybuilder guy, but he had the size, but he could do nip-ups at that size and fucking at the same time looked like a grown man. Great promo. And they take him up there and make them fucking blithering, simpleton, undercard idiots for that fucking Linda Miles, the worst female talent up until Jane Cargill that's ever crossed into a wrestling ring. And they were, because she had a striking look, the writers wanted to write the team around her instead of ignoring the fact that we said she's the worst female student we've ever had and she's never going to get this at all. And she had no knowledge of how to be a dominatrix. So that killed him. And then, oh, it was fucking brutal. Talk about giving somebody a fucking gimmick that they have no bearing in real life to whatsoever. And so that pretty much buried him. And then I tried to get him a spot in TNA, but at that point, Danny was pretty much fed up with the wrestling business, and he didn't really care. And one time they were supposed to be there, him and Doug, and they didn't send him a plane ticket because it was TNA and they didn't have their shit together, but he didn't call to ask for it because he just figured, well, they don't want me and I don't care because I hate wrestling now because it was my life, but I've worked for the WWF. So they got mad at him for not calling to ask why they didn't send him a ticket to the place he was supposed to be and said, well, he doesn't care. So then Doug had a fucking tryout match as a single, and Doug at that time could outwork probably 75% of the TNA roster. But he gets in a ring, and within 3 minutes, he wants to impress everybody, so he fucking does a spot where he takes his big bump out of the goddamn ring, but he forgets it's a 6-sided ring, and they've got those steel stairs everywhere, and he flies headfirst through the ropes on a side that the stairs are on that you wouldn't think because did I mention 6 sides of this fucking ring? And he knocked himself out. Couldn't get back in the ring. A legitimate count out. I said, well, fuck me. And so that was that. So, I mean, so that's what the Damager was, and that's what he could have been, and that's what they all could have been. But as we've mentioned, I would say everybody talks about how much talent they got out of OVW and the WWE. I would say 60% of the guys that should have been there never got the chance or never got a real chance. So it would have been ludicrous, the amount of guys they would have got from OVW if they hadn't buried half of them by trying to change their gimmick or change them or make them do something stupid or work with a fucking moron that they were in love with. Damager was one of those. And I don't think he's wrestled. That was 2000. probably 7, 8. He probably hadn't wrestled since then. Last time I saw him, he had a full head of hair. It's funny, guys used to lose their hair in the wrestling business. Now they're bald when they wrestle, and they get out of the wrestling business. They grow their hair back.
Have you seen recent pictures of Honky Tonk Man?
I have not.
He's full Wayne Ferris. Long gray hair, long gray beard. It looks like punk rock Wayne Ferris grew up. It's pretty cool to see. It's on social media. I'm sure you'll be flooded with photos of Honky Tonk Man in the next few hours. Hey, let's stay on a similar topic to what we just talked about. This next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jeremy Bevan, or Bevan, Madison, Indiana.
Wait a minute, Bevan? Wasn't he the guy who used to team up with Butthead?
Beavin. I said Bevan, and then I said Bevan. It's Bevan, right? Bevan.
I don't know. It's whatever he wants it to be.
I have heard you talk a lot about some of the OVW guys that WWE misused, such as the Bashams.
Oh, there you go.
Most of the Spirit Squad, etc. But it seems I have only heard you mention Rob Conway in passing. The Artful Dodger has talked about him and basically says that Rob has his own ideas that weren't good and that he didn't work with what WWE gave him. I have had the privilege of being in the same locker room with Rob Conway at events over the years, and I've found him to be a very good guy. He is always giving the younger guys advice, which always sounds good. I have never heard him pitch anything silly. His work in the ring always looks very good. Yeah. His run with the NWA belt seemed to really have brought some relevance back to that name as well. So what are your thoughts on Rob Conway, his WWE time, and his time as a vet on the indies?
Well, I think probably the only reason that I don't talk about how they fucked Conway up is because compared to the other guys, at least he got somewhat of a run. He was, and part of it had to be, being Sylvain Grenier's babysitter because, I mean, that was another thing. I know because he's French Canadian, and Pat had recommended him, but Sly, as they called him, I didn't have any problem with him, but he wasn't real good when he came in, and other guys had to carry him. But because he was the one that was particularly blessed by Pat and sent here by the office and etc., they took care of him better when in actuality, he was the weak sister on the team. But they didn't fuck Rob over as bad as they did the other guys, especially the Bashams. Rob was there for quite a while. He had the tag team title. He was involved in shit. I didn't watch every single bit of it, so I don't know if they may have fucking buried him on the air in some cases. I don't know. But the point is, they used him better than they used some of these guys. Poor Dinsmore. And I know he loved the Eugene gimmick. And I know that it was hot for a while, but he was doomed because that kind of gimmick, especially since they didn't work it right, they didn't know how to work it. He did, but they didn't. Once you start outsmarting the fucking idiot, then he's dead. The only reason that Rain Man as a wrestler worked was because he was outsmarting the people that were supposedly smart. Then when he became just another flunky, and then how do you come back from that? I've mentioned before, we used to be able to, we'd run Nick Dinsmore's high school, a show once a year where he actually not only graduated, but was at one time an assistant teacher. And Nick Dinsmore would draw 500 people. We got Eugene off national TV and he drew 250. Because we couldn't advertise Nick, fucking Nick Dinsmore, your friend. And we also, the fucking school didn't want this goddamn guy that spelled his name with a backwards E and waved like a blithering nincompoop. Oh, yeah, he used to be an assistant teacher over here. Point is, yes, Rob Conway was a very valuable guy and a great talent. I don't know what's up Bruce's ass, except that every time somebody didn't want to do some stupid shit that they wanted them to do, they said, well, they had bad ideas. I don't recall Rob liked Shawn Michaels. Rob's epitome of a wrestler was not Ric Flair, was Shawn Michaels. That's the only screwy thing that I ever, fucking can remember about him as far as wrestling. But no, he'd be like goddamn Lou Thez compared to the crowd today. Bruce just, whenever they give somebody, as we've seen with Terry Taylor and the Red Rooster, he still won't come off of, whenever they give somebody a stupid gimmick, it doesn't work, and people laugh at it, Bruce will say, well, they didn't embrace it right, or they didn't give it everything they had, or whatever the case. It can't be just, well, this was a stupid thing we told this guy to do. But Conway was very good. He was always helpful. The Iron Man, Rob Conway in OVW, with that sinister glove that could be loaded and used for a variety of purposes. You could always count on him if you needed 3 minutes or 30, and it didn't matter. It was always going to be good. He stayed in shape. So,
Remember, they had him on Raw once. They gave him like a new song. It was like, just look at me. It was just this ridiculous song, and he came out to it. And I think it was one of those Legends nights where they had like every single legend in the ring in front of the fans kick the shit out of Rob Conway.
Well, I'm sure they did. Yeah. And see, that's the thing is, it's just, it's never going to change because this is the way they do things. But they don't get a wrestler that for whatever reason has talent and people kind of like him and he can work and he can talk a bit and there's something there. They don't get that wrestler and then flesh him out. Let him get more experience. Let him get more comfortable with himself and magnify the things about the guy that you liked to begin with, that caught your attention to begin with, that you wanted to use and bring along to begin with, and magnify those things. They find a guy that they like and they say, okay, come over here. Now, here's your name. Here's how you're going to dress. Here's what your fucking gimmick is. Change everything. Do this. Fuck you. Get a guy that does that already, because that's not what I do. So that's where, and it's not going to change. That's what they've been doing. That's what they're going to continue to do. And that's why guys are miserable at work there, and that's why nobody gets over anymore. And that's why I hate the fucking comedy writers, because they're acting like this is a television show they're casting, and because they're fucking idiots and they don't know what wrestling is. And the only people that know what wrestling is these days are afraid to tell them because they're afraid that they won't continue to have a fucking job, because they don't want to do wrestling and they don't want to hear about it. They want to continue doing stupid shit that fewer and fewer people watch instead of doing wrestling. So it's a vicious circle you see here.
Well, Jim, come to think of it, there have been so many wrestlers from OVW that have been misused, given bad gimmicks, their careers ruined, left wrestling. So many of them, you would think they could easily get together. And
Class action.
Class action. That's what I'm talking about.
That's right, because there were so many promising athletes that could have had multi-million-dollar careers in professional wrestling if it wasn't for the fact that the comedy writers, just like modern day times today, back in the OVW days, didn't know how to pick talent. If there was only somebody that we could think of that could gather all those names of those promising wrestlers' careers that were ruined by the evil empire of the WWE, get them together in a class action suit and sue the publicly traded company known as World Wrestling Entertainment for sabotage of gimmicks. Who could do that? Who, I say?
Call Stephen P. News. If you need to sue. An outlaw mud show or two. Still to the rest.
Well, it ain't Leor, but it'll do for now. Folks, that's right. If indeed you need to sue, call Stephen P. New, newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. In addition to the class action suits involving cancerous talcum powder and defective earplugs from 3M that have damaged the hearing of our service members. Those things are starting to go to trial, folks, and we're going to have some news on that upcoming very soon. Also, the cancer-causing agents left in the ground by chemical companies and miners. Also, all the other people, the downtrodden groups that Stephen P. New has helped, represented, gotten justice for, and more importantly, judgments for, We've talked about it for years on the program. He is the real deal. You know, some people even thought he was fictitious, just all made up. And then they found out that Stephen P. New is a real, live, legal lion that will hop on you in a court of law. And I'll tell you something about Stephen. If you want to hop on him, it's a whole lot easier to hop on than it is to hop off. And also,
What?
in it, that's a lie. That's an old babyface line. You want to hop on me, son? It's a whole lot easier to hop on than it is to hop off. You can draw your own conclusions. But anyway, besides that, Stephen is sponsoring the big all-star wrestling event in Beckley, West Virginia at the Raleigh County Armory this August, the Bash in Beckley. And we're going to have more news on that upcoming as the summer goes on. Jerry the King Lawler's going to be there, a whole bunch of people at the former home of Smoky Mountain Wrestling in Beckley, West Virginia. The Raleigh County Armory, the scene of some of my greatest lawsuits, folks. But Stephen P. New and newlawoffice.com, 888-6. As a matter of fact, call this number if you want tickets to Bash in Beckley, or if you have someone in your family that needs legal representation, 888-692-8084. He can fix you up for anything. Stephen P. New, get even with Stephen.
That's right. And Jim, before we get going with a few more questions and some songs, some breaking news as we are recording the show here. Another death to report. Paul Christie has passed away at the age of 82 years old.
Golden boy Paul Christie. And that Paul Christie is one of the first wrestlers that I ever saw. And do you know why?
Because he was on Bruiser's TV.
Well, not only was he on Bruiser's TV, but he was the babyface world champion for Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling in 1972 and 73 when they were running opposition to Jarrett here in Louisville. Angelo Poffo was the top heel because obviously he had invested in the promotion. We didn't know that back then. And he and Paul Christie, it was kind of bizarre because this was before I was in any way smart to the wrestling business. And I knew that it was another wrestling program on the air and started watching it. And that's where, you know, I saw Plowboy Frazier for the first time. And Sweet Daddy Watts, who was just a trip unto him. If there's any videotape of Sweet Daddy Watts doing a promo available, I will pay $1,000 for that. I've never seen any Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling video footage to this day, but God damn it. Not only were Sweet Daddy Watts and Plowboy Frazier the world's largest tag team, combined weight 822 pounds, because Frazier was 7 feet tall and 420 pounds, and Sweet Daddy Watts was about 5'6" and 402 pounds.
Hey, let me ask you something, because I was recently, it's so funny you bring this up, I was recently going through my files, and I got to the Watts section, and there's Cowboy Bill Watts.
Yeah.
Gorilla Watts, who we know was...
Gorilla Watts, that's Sweet Daddy Watts.
And then there was a separate folder for Sweet Daddy Watts, but I was looking and I realized it was the same guy.
He started in the business in the, I guess, early 70s, maybe late 60s. And that's at a period of time where I believe it was, once again, it was the Culkins that were on the outs with Leroy McGurk and Watts. And we've mentioned that George C. Culkin was not happy every time the Junkyard Dog would mention his name on Jackson, Mississippi television, because JYD knew that George C. Culkin was somewhat of a racist, and he would call the office and go, "Why is that black boy I was talking to mention my name, saying he was over here at my house eating fried chicken and watermelon on my front porch?" Anyway, at one point in time, they named this young guy that was getting in the wrestling business. He was obviously African-American. He was 5'6". He was about 400 pounds. They named him Gorilla Watts because Bill Watts was at the time booking for Leroy McGurk, and it was a shot at Bill Watts at the time. But then this guy, he was more natural as a babyface, and I'll tell you why. And this is also why I would pay $1,000 for a videotape of an interview with Sweet Daddy Watts. He stuttered bad, but he had a great smile, and he's 400 pounds, and the kids liked him. So they made him Sweet Daddy Watts, and he was a baby face, and he would come out and he would do the promo, and it would take him 2 minutes to get one sentence out. But the people fucking loved it, right? So anyway, Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling consisted of Plowboy Frazier and Sweet Daddy Watts. They were a couple of the baby faces. And Saul Weingroff and the Von Brauners were the top heel team because they were on the outs with Jarrett. Saul was mad at Jerry Jarrett, who was booking this end of Nick's territory. So he went to and took the Von Brauners with him to work for the opposition for the first 9 months or so. And Angelo Poffo, as I said, had money in it. He was the top single heel. He was still used as the graduate gimmick. And Paul Christie was the babyface world champion. And that lasted for about the first 9 months or a year of Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling. And then almost the whole goddamn, it was still Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling, but almost the whole goddamn talent roster changed. What I think that was maybe when some people pulled their money out and the Von Brauners said, fuck it, we're going to California or whatever. So for a time there, it was a completely different roster, and then they folded up and went out of town to begin with. But Paul Christie at the time, this was 1972-73, he was already, since you just mentioned he was 82 years old, he was already in his early 30s at that point. And he also worked underneath in the Midwest because he was originally from the Chicago area. He worked underneath in Chicago and Indianapolis and for Bruiser for all those years, as well as just a journeyman underneath babyface. But then finally, when Bruiser's territory was kind of aging out, I guess probably 1979, 80, that area, they moved Paul up and they switched him heel, and he got a valet named Miss Bunny Love, who was considerably younger than he was at the time. I think they may still have been together because I heard from Bobby Fulton recently. He had talked to Bunny Love on the internet. But anyway, but by that point, he looked so good. He looked like one of those 60s movie star, TV star kind of guys with the wavy hair, and he was a real good looking guy, but he was already at the time of 40 years old, and suddenly he's a top heel, and he was really good at it because he'd always been a good worker, but as a babyface, his promos were just like, yeah, I'm going to do the best I can against the Sheik. But all of a sudden, he becomes a heel, and he's got the valet and the girl, and she's wearing like these old gangster mall hats and fucking taking publicity pictures with a gun and a holster in her fucking stockings. She had long legs, and he's got the fucking flashy zoot suit on, and he would do interviews with Sam Menaker where he comes out wearing sunglasses, and he's talking kind of like this. He's being heelish, but he's talking kind of normal. But then halfway through the interview, he would take the sunglasses off, and he had the biggest goddamn wide bug eyes that you've ever seen, like a fucking lunatic. And it struck you. I remember it 40 years later. And he's doing some great promos, and it was a shame because nobody was going to draw much money at that point in time in that territory, the last couple of years that it was around, but he was very enjoyable. But he'd been around. I've seen his name listed in the early 60s in the Chicago programs and et cetera at the International Amphitheater. So he had been around a lot longer than most people knew, and just was one of those guys who was really in good shape and looked a lot younger than he really was. So I hate to hear that, but at 82, I guess it's probably getting about time.
Well, it's about time to get some more questions here on the show, Jim. This next one.
I'll tell you one more thing about Paul Chris. They had the greatest angle that I never got to see the fucking resolution to, and it took 25 years before I found out what happened, and Rip Rogers finally clued me in. Angelo Poffo comes out, and he's got a big gift-wrapped box. Not big enough for a human being to be in, but about 2 or 3 feet square, right? And he's giving it to Paul Christie, the world champion. And Paul Christie comes out, and the box is sitting there on the desk, and Buzz Benson, the commentator, is going, well, I don't know, Paul. I don't know if I'd trust this or not. He said, I don't want a present from Poffo anyway. And the next week, Poffo brings the box back out. He's trying to give it. And this goes on for 3 or 4 weeks. And one time, Christie comes out, takes the box off the desk, sets it on the floor, climbs up on the desk. He's going to jump off and just squash this box with both feet. And the announcer's like, Paul, don't. You don't know what Poffo's done. There could be broken glass in that box. And finally, the week that it was going to be revealed what happened or what was in the box or what was going on, that's when they'd taken the goddamn TV show off the air here. So we never found out what was in the box or what he was trying to give to Paul Christie. And 25 years later, I'm down here at OVW, and Rip Rogers, who is a wrestling savant and actually all professional sports, but especially wrestling, he'd seen everything. He remembered everything, and he got the TV. Guess what it was? A plastic bag. He opened the gift wrap box and pulled out an empty plastic bag, and Poffo jumped him from behind and put the bag over his head and tried to fucking suffocate him. And all the referees come out and blah, 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 and there's chaos, and there you go. He tried to kill the babyface. And that's why there's no new angles in wrestling. Sometimes there's new twists on some of them. But a lot of times you could do these things in each individual territory because the TV wasn't seen worldwide and nobody knew that it had happened. If it happened in Dallas, nobody in fucking Baltimore knew. So guys would do these different angles that they'd had success with. And that's why it fucking tickled me so bad in one way when Flair did the deal at the Clash of Champions where Funk and Gary Hart and them put the plastic bag over his head and tried to suffocate him. My God, the heat that it got from the fans, and the ratings were going up and the buy rates were going up on the pay-per-views, but the fucking people at TBS went fucking ballistic, just were bullshit, and sent an email, or not an email at the time, but sent a memo. No, you can't do this. Some of the kids at home may try it. Good, then have the announcer say, kids, don't try this at home. We're running a fucking business. But no, they were fucking, you can never do anything like this again. And Flair was in the car with me and Kevin. He was like fucking Jim Morrison about the Ed Sullivan show. Hey, man, we did it already. We don't need to do it again. Because it got over with the wrestling fans, but a lot of people were like, oh, my God, this is terrible. It's the first time this has ever happened before. No, it was the plastic bag over the fucking head angle. It happened in every fucking territory at one time or another.
Our next question, Jim, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Al in Denton, Texas. Overall, which wrestling style ruined the business more? Shawn Michaels' high-flying style or Mick Foley's hardcore style? Mick spawned all of the awful outlaw mud shows, but Shawn is the reason the Little Bucks even exist and why thigh slapping is so prevalent.
Oh, Shawn Michaels, he wasn't a high flyer the way that people traditionally think of. He wasn't in the vein of Tiger Mask or in the 70s Red Bastien or now any of number of these gymnastic, fucking exhibitions. Shawn was a smaller guy that could come off the top rope and cross body and drop kick and do shit. So it wasn't really that he was a high flyer. Shawn was a tremendous performer and could have a good match, an exciting match with almost anybody. My biggest complaint about Shawn Michaels' wrestling style, as opposed to anything else about him, was that it was so pretty. It was like... It was too precise and it was too effortless almost. When he would do the upside down bump in the turnbuckle, it didn't look like somebody like a Ray Stevens or even like a Flair or like some of the other guys that have really done the upside. Terry Gordy, when he was young before his knees fucking went, could do a goddamn upside down at 280. You couldn't believe. It looked with those guys like they were being thrown upside down into something and bouncing out. With Michaels, it was the pretty up and over and then back down, and he'd even land on his feet and then turn around for more abuse. So that's the only criticism I have about Michaels' work is that sometimes it looked so effortless that it just looked too fluid. Some people said that about Ricky Steamboat's selling. And I didn't see that because Steamboat's body language and selling wasn't too pretty. It conveyed pain or blues or agony or whatever. But I thought Shawn was a little pretty. With Cactus, he does have to bear some of the responsibility just because of the people that wanted to imitate what he was doing without understanding that he was still an incredibly talented guy that mentally got wrestling and could do a promo and had a personality, and it wasn't just a stunt show. That's the way he got noticed, because he had to get noticed in a very constricted time for the wrestling business where there weren't a lot of spots going around. But that's what a lot of these, goofy, the chimpanzees that just want to imitate shit without having any knowledge of it. All they saw was the bumps. But he's got to bear some responsibility. After I saw somebody that wrote quite a persuasive argument for that here recently with all the talk of all the death matches and shit. Well, Mick Foley and Terry Funk were right there. I can see what they were thinking at the time, and then I can look back on it and say they shouldn't have fucking done it. Because there were no death match promotions at the time. Terry Funk's been in Texas death matches, which is as far from death matches that they call them now as I am from a fucking NASA astronaut. Blood and violence was always a part of it, and Terry, being from Amarillo and being the son of Dory Funk Sr., knew that better than most, but it was believable blood and violence. Then they get the opportunity to get big paydays for going over and doing Onita's shit, and they're thinking, okay, it's in Japan. Nobody in the United States is going to see this except the tape traders. They couldn't have dreamed that there would be entire promotions spawned out of this that were the guys, all they did was this fucking light tube, barbed wire, broken glass bullshit. I don't think they would have ever dreamed that would happen at the time. They were doing a variation of wrestling, and they were both guys that were very talented at regular wrestling. And so it's like me. I had a simple little idea for my Christmas show because I've got a baby face, a heel, and one that I'm fixing to switch from fucking baby face to heel. And boy, I could put them all three in the ring at the same time because they're all three mad at each other according to the fucking angle. You know what? You asked if I've regretted anything earlier. I just come up with another one. I never knew that 30 years later, there would be 3 ways and 4 ways on every goddamn wrestling card for no reason, ad nauseum everywhere. It's the same thing. I don't think that either Cactus or Mick realized at the time that anything like what has happened would happen. They thought it would still be professional wrestling with people promoting it that had experience in the business, and it wasn't just going to be a bunch of fucking meth heads that don't give a fuck whether they die or not, fucking doing this shit for no reason in front of people in a field. But they still bear some responsibility for it. So, I don't know, the Young Bucks, they would have imitated the Rock and Roll Express or the Hardy Boys or anybody else than Shawn. They have. Than anybody else than Shawn Michaels. That I don't think was as big a deal as what has become of this garbage deathmatch wrestling stuff. And to justify it, everybody always wants to point to, well, Terry Funk did it or Mick Foley did it. And they're probably about as fucking thrilled right now about that as I am about the fucking triple threat match.
Our next question, Jim, sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Chris O'Mealy is fully vaccinated.
Well, that's good to know.
What was Vince McMahon and the WWF's reaction to the Slamboree 98 stunt that Eric Bischoff put on with his fake match? Were people upset, outraged, or was it treated like the big joke that it was?
Okay, now tell me what Eric Bischoff's big deal at Slamboree was.
Was that when he challenged Vince to a fight? To a match?
Oh, okay. Oh, I thought it was something they actually had. That what? Hey, Vince would have wanted to fight him on a couple of different occasions, and I do remember the challenge. It obviously was never going to happen. Some people had to remind Vince that it was never going to happen. But yeah, because I mean, Jesus Christ, it would have been a crummy fight. But honestly, we've talked about this before. We've seen that Bischoff's martial arts didn't work in practical application because he sure didn't go all kung fu on Flair. And let's face it, Vince has a fucking foot and 50 pounds on him, and Vince was heavily jacked up at that point. And also the thing is, always bet on fucking crazy. Vince would have killed Eric Bischoff because Vince would have rather actually died, breath leaving his body, family going to have to fucking bury him and sing some fucking slow songs over him, dead, than lose a fight to Eric Bischoff. I don't think Eric Bischoff was that motivated, regardless of what he might have said. I think he was doing it for publicity. If they had to have fought, Vince McMahon would have killed him and then gone to prison, because that's the only thing that would have satisfied Vince McMahon. and I don't think Eric Bischoff was willing to make anywhere near that level of commitment. Do you?
If Vince McMahon had fought Eric Bischoff and indeed killed him, like you just said, do you think when he was in jail, they would have brought in Jerry Jarrett to run the company?
Possibly, because he knew where all the fucking offices were, because he'd been through that. But no, in all seriousness, I'm sorry, but it wouldn't have been a great fight. It certainly wouldn't have been a great match, but Vince McMahon would have kicked the shit out of Eric Bischoff because of fucking size and mental state. Eric Bischoff, I don't care what he psyched himself up into thinking, would not have gone into a fight with Vince McMahon thinking, I'm going to kill this motherfucker before he kills me. If it came to a fight where Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff were going to fight and people were going to find out the goddamn results of it, I guarantee you, I don't care what he had to do, if he had to bring a gun, a knife, pull a guy's eyes out, Vince McMahon would have refused to fucking lose. And perception is reality. So there you have it. But no, mostly everybody was laughing at it, but not in front of Vince, because Vince was at one point, well, I'll do that. No, you won't, Vince.
Well, if he's not watching, who's the one who actually says, excuse me, Vince, Eric Bischoff's challenging you on live TV to a match?
All that stuff's in the Finkel report.
All right.
Well, I mean, no, he didn't sit down and watch the show, but it was summarized. Anything he might need to know about was summarized in the Finkel report and or in a verbal conversation with somebody else.
Our next question, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Jacob in Los Angeles, California. Recently, there's accusations on Sting made by Shaggy 2 Dope. He recently discussed...
What? Wait, what?
Oh, sometimes the grammar gets you early. This is a question. I guess Shaggy 2 Dope is the guy from the Insane Clown Posse.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I guess that is, yeah.
Recently, there's accusations on Sting made by Shaggy 2 Dope. He recently discussed about wrestlers on a recent episode of some podcast. I don't know what this is. When Sting was brought up...
Is the Insane Clown Posse still a fucking thing that happens?
Apparently. Apparently. But when Sting was brought up during this interview, Shaggy 2 Dope had this to say. Sting, he's a rat. He fucking told on all the wrestlers who were cheating on their wives. Just ratted them out.
What?
He turned fucking Christian and ratted all the boys in the back. Told all of their wives that they were all fucking. According to Ringside News, Sting hasn't commented on the accusations right now. It's just Shaggy calling out Sting if Sting did snitch on his fellow wrestlers, he must have been busy, since there are many stories of wrestler infidelities on the road. The grammar's going off the rails here. But Jim, what are your thoughts on these accusations? Any truth to them? Is Sting a rat?
I have not heard this. Now, I like Stinger, but I don't put anything past anybody that becomes a religion addict. Because generally, as we've seen, when people are addicted to other things and they kick that, somehow religion takes its place. I think that's actually more damaging than the other addictions because you're warping your brain instead of your body. But I've never heard him stooging on. Maybe it was one person and it just got, it escalated. I don't know. I don't want to brand Sting as a person who would tell the boys' wives that they were cheating on them. That's probably the biggest no-no in the history of the wrestling business, is you don't tell the wives what their husbands are fucking doing. And I would think that somebody that's been in the business as long as Sting, even if he did get, join the Invisible Man in the Skies fan club, that he wouldn't do that. So I can't comment positive or negative. I'll tell you one person who did. This is a funny ass fucking story. It wasn't funny if you were Ricky Morton, but remember when Tully was still living in Charlotte, when he got religion, when Herd fucked him around and he was out of the business, he was on one of those 700 Club shows because he started going around talking and doing preaching and etc. And Ricky Morton's wife at the time was trying to lean into the religion deal. And she said, oh, let's sit down and watch the 700 Club with Tully on it, right? And he proceeds to tell a story about how back in his day, before he saw the light, old Tully, that he was out there doing drugs and having sex with every woman in Charlotte. And then he proceeded to name the people that were doing it with him, including Ricky Morton.
Oh, my God.
And Ricky turns and his wife looked at him and he's like, God damn, Tully, what the fuck? And that caused quite an issue there in the Morton household. And there was some heat there for a little while. But yeah, I don't know. I ain't going to touch that one.
All right, well, let's get one or possibly two more questions in here. Let's see how this goes. This next one, Jim, let's see if you'll touch this. This next question, sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Booker Teat in Boring, Oregon. I read from The Observer that there were talks in WWE that they may bring John Cena back for the first SmackDown with fans in the building, July 16th, I believe. With Cena's potential return back to WWE, I wanted to know Jim's thoughts on if Cena were to have a match with someone, who would be the best person for him to work with? Also, with Jim knowing John back in the OVW days, how do you think John would react to the stupid zombie shit that WWE pulled at Backlash?
Well, if it was John from 2001, he'd probably be rolling his eyes. But I'm pretty sure he's used to all the tomfoolery they get into up there at this point. And also he's coming in from Hollywood just to do, if he does come in, it's not like they're going to bring him back to work 5 nights a week. He's got other things going on. I assume they might bring him back for, as you said, for ratings when the fans are back, for a nice pop for them, whatever. That doesn't mean he's coming back to, hey, the new kid in the territory or whatever. And I would assume that he's long since, gotten out of the wrestling business and in the sports entertainment business, because it's been Betty good to him. So I don't think he'd probably give a shit, because, that's why so many people disappoint me these days, because even guys that have been through the OVW program or were taught by guys that respected the business or would never do bullshit like that, they're all now saying, oh, my character, or we developed the character, or the whatever, and they've all rolled over and played dead for it. So I don't think John would be mortified about the zombies. And to be honest, I think if he's coming back for nice payoff and to help the company that gave him a job for so long. I don't think he particularly gives a shit if, otherwise than just because it's been a part of his life for a while. I don't think he gives a shit how necessarily the wrestling business is doing these days, or, probably thinks he's going to come back and save it single-handedly. So I don't think John's a guy that's going to be upset over the zombies.
What do you think of the idea he's coming back now?
Well, why would they got to bring somebody back to pop a fucking rating, and he can actually still do something physically. You'll tell when Vince has given up on John being able to have a match or do anything physically when they start bringing him back and pissing in his face on the legend segments like they did guys like Mark Henry or whatever, instead of bringing him back and painting him in a positive light. But yes, it's too bad they don't have more guys that can or will come back, because they might get a rating out of it, because they've botched the current crew that they've got. Has there ever been I saw SmackDown is down to 1.8 million people. My God, didn't that used to be like the fucking Saturday morning live wire audience? It can't get much worse. Well, in the words of Robert Fuller, it can't get much worse. In the words of Jerry Jarrett, oh, yes, it can. Or I did that backwards.
You certainly did.
Jerry Jarrett said it can't get much worse, Robert. And Robert said, oh, yes, it can. What do they want me to say about John coming back? My God, if I bet you if the Cincinnati Reds could bring Babe Ruth back, they'd probably bring him too.
All right, Jim, our final question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Roderick in Arkansas.
That's a lie. There's nobody in Arkansas named Roderick.
First, let me send well wishes to the lovely Stacy on a speedy recovery.
Thank you. And by the way, her back is doing better. She's still just a little stiff, but she's up and about now, and the incision's just a little small thing at this point.
Theodore Long said in a recent interview that Ric Flair hated him. So much so that, according to Long, Gary Hart made a blade for Long and said, quote, if he keeps bothering you, you take this blade and cut his goddamn throat. Does Jim know anything about this, and what could have potentially caused Flair to hate Teddy Long? Was it race-related? Side note, Teddy Long also accused Ole Anderson of being a racist towards him as well.
Well, I don't think Ole Anderson was a racist toward Teddy Long. I just think Ole Anderson is a grumpy human being toward everybody, and he likes to let people know it. As far as Gary Hart making a blade I don't know. I mean, I don't know what was going on in Gary's mind, but Gary, as you know, carried a blade around from his days as a manager that had heat, because just in case, and he had to use it a couple times. Once in the locker room, at least, with the missing Link, when Link sucker punched Gary and Gary fucking sliced Link from asshole to appetite. But at the time that Gary was there in the NWA, it was 1989, 1990. Teddy had just become a manager. Ric Flair was the booker for a good part of that. Gary was being used on top with Funk and Muta. I don't know why that Gary would have suggested to Teddy that he cut the booker's throat when Rick was using him. Maybe there was some heat about how the Gary Hart's stable was getting used. I don't know. I've heard Teddy fucking say how bad that he couldn't stand Flair, and that Flair was an asshole to him. I don't know what would have caused it. I never saw it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying I never saw it. I know that when Flair was the booker and Teddy had first started managing, that there was no issue. We were booking Teddy just like we'd book anybody else, and he didn't say anything bad about him in any meetings. And, we used Doom, blah, blah, blah. I know probably when Teddy was a referee, at that point, he's a referee for the TBS shows on Saturday morning, and he's hauling the ring, and maybe Flair talked down to him then because he was just the ring guy or the fill-in referee. It wasn't something that Rick did on a regular basis, but I'm not saying that it couldn't have happened.
But you don't remember any specific things from booking meetings like, I don't want to use this guy, I hate this guy.
No. If he hadn't wanted to use him, we wouldn't have been using him. You know, and I never heard Flair say anything bad about Teddy, you know, when there was no reason for him not to. You know, it was like you said, fuck, I don't want to book that guy, or fuck, he's the shits, or something like that. No. So maybe it was just, I like Teddy. We've always gotten along. Love Theodore Long. Obviously, I like Flair, and I owe a lot to him. He helped me out, you know, a ton in getting a lot of my spots. I don't know why I don't know. Does Flair know that Teddy hates him? And does he give a shit? I don't know anything about this. So I don't know what caused it. And who knows if it was misunderstanding or what happened. But I can't pick a side, and I can't comment because I don't know what the fuck's going on with it.
Remember they did that angle in 1990? It was actually pretty cool. In the midst of all that Black Scorpion shit, where Flair got Teddy Long as his limo driver or his butler for a day. And he's driving Flair around, they're filming it, and he pulls into an alley, and Flair's like, what are we doing here? The door opens, and just like 5 guys drag Ric Flair out of the car in his suit, down the alley. It's like a horror film. He's like, get in, let me go! You have to wonder, what are these 5 guys going to do to Flair? And how's he ever going to get home? Meanwhile, there's Ron Simmons at Butchery just casually walking up to the car and posing with the car. But I mean, Teddy and Flair working there was great. And that's the end of 1990.
And goddamn, you've just acknowledged that they were kidnapping people back then too.
You know, since we raised the issue,
I didn't write that one either.
Since we raised the issue of Abduct Everyone Wrestling, haven't been too many kidnappings. I guess kidnapping season ends in January, approximately.
Kidnapping season is over.
We'll see what happens next year, and we'll see what happens next week. The drive-thru is closed.
Oh, we're done all right.
Of course, you can hear the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts Saturday, wherever you find your favorite podcast. This is the week, right, Jim, where you are going to watch AEW live as it happens. No fast forward, no rewind. You're going to watch it live.
Well, that's because it's on from 10 to midnight on Friday, and we've got to record first thing Saturday morning. So, unfortunately, I will be doing that. And yes, and I probably will be grumpy.
Of course, we'll.
Is that English? Is there a Romanian? Possibly Czechoslovakian you came out with there? Yeah, Jerry Novak, one of the bounty hunters. But he also worked as a single, and he was the Russian invader, and he was a variety of masked men, the super destroyer at one point in Tennessee. He was from somewhere near Russia, whether it was, you know, I don't know, fucking Lithuania or whatever. He had a Eastern European accent, and he spoke that language. And so when they made him the Russian invader, he's cutting a promo in that accent, and all of a sudden, he just says, and then he stopped. And everybody looked, why'd you stop? It was going so good. He just got fumfered and was doing gibberish. And we thought he was speaking Russian. He just was fumbling over his words.
Of course, the drive-thru next week on Tuesday. Wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Don't forget, you can access classic episodes of the drive-thru and the experience right now by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/Cornette. If you enjoy this show each and every week and the experience each and every week, hear the original full broadcasts going back to 2013, episodes added each and every week. Patreon.com/Cornette. The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette for full episodes, clips from episodes, omnibus collections, and so much more. Subscribe today and join over 215,000 strong on our march to 1 million, the official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. You can follow Jim on Twitter at @TheJimCornette. You can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com. available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Cornette's Collectibles at JimCornette.com.
Is closed.
At JimCornette.com. The Drive-Thru is brought to you by the Law Office of Stephen P. New, 888-692-8084. Get even with Stephen at newlawoffice.com. But until Saturday on The Experience, and next week right back here on The Drive-Thru, for Jim Cornette, I'm the great Brian Last. Tally-ho!
When are we going to blister these dadgum Lithuanians?